Welcome to the members of the public that are making statements this evening. Can I also welcome anyone watching on YouTube at our meeting this evening? Item 1, apologies for absence. I have apologies for absence from Councillor Ritchie, and he is being substituted by Councillor Mrs Wilson. I have no further apologies. I'm sure Councillor Wrench is on his way. Item 2, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest relating to items on the agenda, having regard to the Code of Conduct for members? Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. In respect of item 5B, I know many of the residents who've made representations to varying degrees. I know several of the speakers, including obviously fellow ward member Councillor Wright. I am a member of Rivenhall Parish Council, which has made representations on the application, but I did not take part, or indeed was even in the building, when discussions on this application took place. Therefore, I shall stay and vote.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chair. In respect of item 5A, Pollisfield Village, as my previous declaration, I know both the applicant and a number of those who have made representations, but I haven't discussed the subject matter of the application with any of them, and therefore will stay and vote.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Mrs Wilson.
Yes, I'm declaring a DPI, and I will read the room and won't be voting on item 5B, because I have actually been out canvassing against the...
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Does anyone else wish to declare an interest? Well, I will do a joint interest on behalf of most of us, because Councillor Lager is speaking this evening and he's known to most of us, and also Councillor Wright is a fellow councillor of us all. So I'll do a joint declaration on behalf of us all on that one. I'm sure we all know Councillor Wright, and I'm sure the majority of you know Councillor Lager. Anyone else? No? Item 3, minutes of the previous meetings. Members, I have the minutes of the 8th of February. The minutes of the 14th of December are as yet not complete. So can I have if everyone is quite happy with the 8th of February ones, can I have a mover and a seconder, please?
Move the 8th of February is a correct record, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, you're seconding. All those in favour that the 8th of February minutes are a correct record? Thank you very much indeed. Item 4, public question time. We have no general questions on planning this evening. Those that wish to speak will speak prior to the items on the agenda. If anyone is watching on YouTube, I would like to just inform you that item 6, the Wethersfield Conservation Area Character Appraisal and Management Plan, has been deferred this evening so that the parish council can be consulted on the changes. And that will come to a meeting later in the next month, possibly. I'm not sure. Item 5, planning applications. The first planning application we're going to consider this evening is application number 20-01239 VAR, Pollisfield Village, Church Lane, Braintree. I do have one speaker on this application, and can I invite the speaker to the table to make his statement? And that is Mr. Farquharson. Farquharson. Thank you, Mr. Farquharson. You have been before. I just remind you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This statement this evening is accompanied by 5 plans. I believe you've all had copies of the plans.
Yes.
And it's attempting to put right something that the planning department hasn't addressed. Throughout the course of the construction at Pollisfield, objectors have made regular representations to the Planning Department of various matters, including the buildings that are closer to the northern boundary than previously approved. For your consideration, I submit these 5 plans which show that the new buildings are now closer to the northern boundary by 2.5 metres, which is 8.2 feet. Drawing 1 is the original scheme approval, which shows the location of the 110 Church Lane being 6.5 metres, just over 8 feet, north of the boundary with Polly's Field. Drawing 2 is an extract from the subsequent planning application, which shows the new boundary development being 17 metres from the northern boundary, as well as the location of 110 Church Lane being 6.5 metres away on the northern side of the same boundary. Drawing 3 is an extract, which was approved layout plan giving under VAR 1702026, which was a slightly revised proposal scheme to try and reduce costs by simplifying various construction elements. You see that the respective positions of 110 Church Lane and the proposed new building have not changed. Drawing 4 is an extract from the current drawings showing the building elevations to Church Lane. Is part of the current submission and clearly shows the new building is now only 14.5 metres from the northern boundary, clearly 2.5 metres, just over 8 feet, closer to 110 Church Lane than originally proposed and approved. Drawing 5 is an extract also from the current buildings, which shows part of the layout, layout of the buildings, and you'll see on that plan that the car parking is adjacent to the northern boundary, parallel with 110 Church Lane, was nose on the original applications, and parallel parking currently. This was a necessary adjustment because of the loss of the space along the northern boundary, and also the need to maintain a 3-metre wide landscaping strip along this boundary. As shown above, this is directly contrary to the Planning Department's comments contained in their summary for the previous planning meeting of the 2nd of November. See paragraph, page 41, paragraph 4, only refers to a slight reduction. 8 feet is not a slight reduction. Page 44, design, appearance and layout, where there are various inaccurate comments about the new buildings, proximity to its neighbours. Page 47, the proposed development will only be physically closer to the neighbouring occupiers, but only by an amount akin to a brick. My time's up. I'm available for questions afterwards. Thank you very much.
We have got all the paperwork, we've seen it, and thank you very much for keeping to your time. Thank you very much. We'll now come to the presentation, and that is going to be made by Carol this evening.
Thank you. This application is related to Polyfield Village to the east of Church Lane in Braintree. This slide shows the current site proposed block plan. And this area photo shows the location of the site. This application has previously been considered by the Planning Committee on the 2nd of November 2021. Where members has resolved to grant permission subject to the completion of Section 106, a deed of variation to modify the Section 106 agreement, subject to a list of conditions. At the last Planning Committee discussing this application, members have discussed about some of the representations submitted by the immediate neighbours. Those representations relates to boundary disputes, raising of land levels in the south, and improper care of the water stream. Following the Planning Committee, officers would consider that it's prudent to withhold issuing the decision and to investigate the matters further. Subsequently, officers has appointed an independent surveyor to conduct stratigraphical survey in January 2022. And the survey are related to the 3 matters. The first matters are related to the relationship of the proposed development and number 110 Church Lane. The second issues relate to the land levels in the southern part of the site and the potential effects on the watercourse. And the third matter is related to the watercourse management during construction period. This slide shows the last two approvals, including the original approval under the 2015 application number. The lower part shows the approved plans that has been approved under the previous variation application. As you can see here, these plans are enlarged plans. I just want to stress that because these are quite large-scale plans, so a slight deviation of measurements can result in quite a significant change in terms of the figures. I just want to highlight that the latest representation and the previous verbal statement just read out earlier relates to measurements that measure from the neighbour 110 Church Lane regarding to the wet line as shown on these two plans, which are the same as the one shown on the Ordnance Survey registered at the Land Registry. However, the black line does not reflect the actual on-site situation of where the shared boundary is. Just want to show on this plan, this is the current proposed plan showing the northern boundaries. As you can see, there's a difference in terms of the overlay of the OS map and the topographic survey submitted by the applicant from in the original application. As you can see here, the OS map is the one outlined in the black boundaries, and the blue one is the one that reflects the on-site situation. So the Land Registry map actually shows that the neighbouring property is slightly further away from the shared boundaries, which is the wet line here. The blue application line here was the original application site boundaries for the previous two applications, and there has been a long ongoing land dispute between the neighbours and the applicant, and therefore the applicant under this current variation application proposed to slightly reduce the boundary into this red line to reflect the existing on-site situations of where the shared boundary fencing stands. This little extract also shows the original topographical survey submitted by the applicant, which the neighbour has not disputed on. And as you can see between the two, it does reflect the same topographical survey. So in this slide, I want to show you the proposed plan here and some of the measurements that we have found following the result of the independent survey, topographical survey that's conducted last month. As you can see here, from the corner of the neighbouring property 110 Church Lane to the existing fencing is about 6.6 meters, and from the corner of the neighbouring property to the corner of the nearest balcony of the proposed development is about 20.6 meters. That tally with the proposed plan at the top right corner. And therefore, officer comes into the finding that the distance between the neighbouring property 110 Church Lane to the proposed development is more or less tally, and members are also reminded that under the current application, the applicant also proposed an amendment to slightly widen the building due to brick size. And that's why in the previous committee report, officers has put down that in terms of the overall width, the width increase is only akin to a brick size, which we're talking about 21 to 23 centimeters. In relation to the second matter, is related to the raising land level. This slide shows the original topographical survey showing the southern part of the site. I apologize because of the scale of the plan. It is very difficult to see the actual measurement, but I will do a bit of an enlargement in the next slide. The upper part of this slide shows the proposed lower ground floor plan, and it also shows some of the topographical points here. The bottom of this slide shows the finding of the independent topographical survey that conducted last month. If you can refer to the yellow circles here, they refer to the ground levels that are slightly higher than what it should be as compared to the original topographical survey. And in terms of the blue circles, it reflects the on-site situation is slightly lower than the original ground levels. Altogether, whether the existing on-site ground levels are higher or lower, we're talking only about 10 to 20 centimeters difference. And members are reminded that the site is still currently under construction and hence not completely completed, and there will be landscaping works done in this part of the site. I will show you a bit further in the site photos. This photo shows the current, the existing entrance of the site. This is a view along Church Lane to the south. This photo shows within the site looking towards the neighbouring property 110 Church Lane. And this is the corner of the balcony that we have done the measurement with. This photo shows the northwest side corner. This is the proposed pedestrian entrance. And this is the existing fencing that we've been referring to earlier. This photo shows the northern elevation of the main building facing towards the garage of 110 Church Lane and the internal road here. Slide 15 shows the southwestern part of the site. As you can see here, last month when officer visited the site, this corner is still under construction and there's piles of soil still waiting to be leveled up for the landscaping works. This picture shows the southern part of the site. And at the back here, this is a building of number 76 Church Lane. This photo shows the proposed greenhouse in the middle of the southern part of the proposed scheme. And as you can see, the site has not been formally made. There's a few photos that also shows the condition of the water course which relate to the third matters being investigated. As you can see, there are some loose has been hanging up on the trees along the eastern boundaries or fallen into the water course. However, the southeastern part of the water stream looks normal. And following the site visit, officer has warned the applicant and the site manager about the debris in the water course and all those that hanging on tree branches. And on the 1st of February, the site managers had confirmed with the case officer that all this debris and loose space has been removed from the water course. So, recommendations. Following the further investigations, officer contend that there's no outstanding dispute in terms of raising ground levels and separation distance between 110 Church Lane and the proposed development. And therefore, officer remained the recommendation to recommend approval subject to conditions and completion of a deed of variation to modify the Section 106. However, it is also feel that it is important to include an additional conditions so that the applicant will make sure that there's the ground level will restore to the original level. In the committee report, officers have recommended the wording of the new conditions. However, it is considered that the trigger point of the condition should not be prior to completion in case the development has not fully complete, and to provide a better time limit for enforcement, it would be better to change the wording as shown on the slide here. It's now recommended that instead of prior to completion, to change the wording to within 1 calendar month from the date of the decision notice. The ground level of the watercourse to the south shall be restored to the original levels as per the topographical survey submitted under the original application. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you very much indeed. Members. Councillor Mann.
Well, thanks to officers for the additional work that's been done on this application. Of the sort of three issues, I think two and three are nailed, but I'm still uncomfortable with the first issue as raised by the speaker tonight. The distance from 110 to that edge of building. Now, I sort of appreciate that there has been an independent survey, but the neighbour in good faith doesn't clearly agree with the evidence or the conclusion. So, are we absolutely certain that the independent surveyor has taken everything in consideration in coming to his or her findings?
Would someone like to respond? I don't know if it'd be Carol or Chris.
I'm happy to come back, Madam Chairman. So I think, thank you for the question, Councillor Mann. So I think two things. So obviously, as Carol mentioned, as members are aware, the application was previously reported, and we held the decision given the context of the debate and the discussion. And I think that was done really as a precautionary measure to make sure that we were absolutely certain, in terms of before we issued a decision on the application, that we were comfortable in terms of what was effectively going to be specified on the decision notice. So the surveyor's report, which Carol has gone through, we're comfortable on that basis in terms of what's shown. We've used the particular surveyor previously, so completely independent, but we've engaged him on other sites as well. So I think we're comfortable on that basis in terms of the process we've followed. But I suppose the other key pertinent point, that the variation application, obviously there's been a series of applications in relation to this site, but the other point about the application is obviously the way the application is being considered is it is a part retrospective application. So in terms of the built relationship to adjacent properties, that has been deemed to be acceptable. So leaving aside the point about the plans, and as I said, I think from an officer perspective, that's been assessed quite closely and has been looked at by officers, and we've had the independent survey. But in terms of the built relationship, that's something which officers are comfortable with in terms of the relationship as on the ground, in terms of the assessment process that's been followed with the application. So I think those are the two pertinent points. I think as I said, the primary purpose for holding the decision and going back over was to check to make sure that from an enforcement perspective, what we didn't want is to be on the back foot effectively if later on down the line we did find in particular the ground levels in the to the rear of the site there was an issue. So with the additional condition in that regard, we're in a stronger position to make sure and ensure compliance. Then we've actually got a measurement we can go back out ourselves and be confident in. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Councillor Mann. Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Mrs. Spray.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I
I largely agree with Councillor Mann's comments on this. I think two of the issues we're looking at this evening are relatively straightforwardly dealt with, and I'm happy that that the developer has got the message about the stream. And it is often the case that when a site is under development, levels can look a bit skewed. And I know that certainly within my own ward, at least one development, it was regarded by nearby residents that the buildings were too high and not in accordance with the planning application that had been granted. And actually, once the properties were built and the ground levels were sorted out and gardens were in place and so on, it looked completely different. I would also agree with Councillor Mann. I think I had concerns about the first point as well, but I'm satisfied with the answer we've had, with the explanation from Carol and a further explanation from Chris. So I'm relatively comfortable about this. I know that this development has caused a lot of concern to neighbours, and I can understand why, and I'm not unsympathetic to that, but I do think that what we've got before us is in accordance with the permission that we granted a short time ago. So I don't think Councillor Mann moved anything, did he? So I'm happy to move, officers. Are we moving recommendation for approval? Yes, on these points this evening. Thank you.
And that is with the new condition 24.
Yes.
Thank you. Does it find a seconder? No? Yeah, Councillor Bob, do you wish to speak? No. Does anyone else wish to add anything else before I put it to the vote? Well, it has been moved by Councillor Mrs Spray, seconded by Councillor Mrs Parker, that we approve this variation with the new condition 24. All those in favour? And that is unanimous. Thank you, members. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you very much for coming to speak this evening. Thank you, Carol. We now move on to application number 2002 060 out. Phase 4, land north east of Rectory Lane, Rivenhall. It can be found on pages 49 to 146, and I do have speakers on this application. The first person wishing to make a statement is Mrs Anne Wright, who is an objector. And Mrs Anne Wright, can I invite you to the table, please? Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chairman and councillors. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. At the last hearing, I was very surprised to see that a planning application that had been put in over a year ago had its focus changed at the last minute into a debate on cycleways around Witham, which never formed part of the original document. But the main feature of this application is the building of 230 dwellings and a bus, cycle and pedestrian connection to Rickstones Road, locally known to us as Busgate. How this impacts on the lives of those residents in the small hamlet of Rickstones End in the vicinity of this Busgate is what brings me here. This appeared to me to have been totally overlooked in the last report by the BDC officer, and anyone seeing the presentation would have believed that the Busgate was in the middle of countryside. It did not show the true position of the connection to Rickstones Road. As a Rivenhall resident living on Rickstones Road, I am here to implore you all to take into account the danger of allowing Busgate to happen. The proposed access and egress of Busgate onto Rickstones Road is onto a double bend and a blind spot for drivers coming from Witham. Drivers approach the hamlet at speeds well in excess of the signed 30 miles an hour speed limit. There have been several accidents and near misses near this stretch of road, and more importantly, and recently, a postman exiting the industrial units on the site of the proposed Busgate was driven into by a car passing at speed on the postman's side of the road. This is all documented with photographs in the objection raised by Councillor Wright and which have been sent to you all. Rule 221 of the Highway Code states that large vehicles need extra road space to deal with hazards that are not visible to other road users, and other road users should be prepared to stop and allow for these large vehicles to manoeuvre. There's not enough space for this to happen without a large vehicle traversing onto the other carriageway. Bellway indicate that they will widen the existing entrance to the work units, but Bellway do not have control over the land for the bus gate. The land is currently occupied, and this has had unfettered use for at least 27 years by the occupant in the house immediately adjacent to it. The sight line for the bus gate is over the driveways of the residents in Homefield cottages, and if they continue to park their vehicles off-road on their own property, they will inhibit the sight line. Equally, if they park on the road, as they are currently legally entitled to do so, the sight line is again compromised. The pathways are narrow along Rickstones Road and are often blocked by people parking on the pavement to avoid their vehicles being hit by fast passing cars. This then has the knock-on effect of pedestrians, including school children, mothers with prams, mobility scooters, etc., having to walk into the road to pass the obstruction. But even, may I just finish up a couple more? But even when not obstructed, the path at its narrowest is only 80 centimetres, and this is approximately 30 metres away from the bus gate access. Rickstones Road is heavily used by pedestrians who walk to the local schools. The bus gate proposes to divert an existing bus service away from the elderly bus users in Forest Road. The existing route could easily be diverted to exit at Evans Road, causing no disruption to the traffic flow or to the elderly regular users of the service. And thank you for letting me finish.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much for coming to make your statement. The next person wishes to make a statement is Councillor Mrs. Mill A. and she's speaking on behalf of Rivenhall Parish Council. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Melanie Ailey. I'm a councillor of Rickstones Parish Council, a local resident and a qualified transport planner with over 25 years' experience. I have submitted 2 reports identifying reasons for objection to this application in respect of highways and transportation. These reasons include unsafe access for buses onto Rickstones Road, not complying with the appropriate design standards, providing insufficient visibility, which will result in increased risk of accidents. No traffic impact assessment on the local highway has been undertaken, therefore it cannot be demonstrated that the additional traffic will not have a severe impact. The size of development will not be sufficient to maintain the proposed bus service, and it will cease operation once the funding from the developer has run out. The proposed cycle link to the town has not been demonstrated as being deliverable. There is insufficient land available between the station and the town, which would result in cyclists and pedestrians conflicting at narrow sections of the highway along routes which have high volumes of vehicle movements, including HGVs. The cycle link between Phase 1 of the development area to Motts Lane has not been delivered, although planning approval was granted 6 years ago, and the delivery of this link should have been implemented prior to the 100th occupation. The reasons are due to technical issues with significant level differences, which would result in cyclists travelling at high speed through an existing recreation area regularly used by children. The planning executive summary for this application identifies a number of significant planning policies that the site does not conform to. However, the officers still believe that the proposals would add to a package of sustainable transport measures being proposed by the applicant, and that these measures outweigh the harms identified. Some of these measures have not yet been delivered, and although the majority of phases 1 to 3 have already been occupied, and it's unlikely that a complete route can safely be provided to the town. NPPF states that safe and suitable access should be provided for all users. Access for the buses has not been demonstrated to be safe. NPPF also states that development should be only prevented or refused on highway grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on safety, highway safety, or residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe. No assessment of impact has been undertaken. In addition, NPPF states that it should be ensured that appropriate opportunities to promote sustainable transport can be taken up. The NPPF advises that all of these points need to be addressed, not just one. It should be noted that if the sustainable transport modes are implemented, they would only provide residents with the opportunity to travel by other modes and will not make residents take up these modes, especially as parking on site will conform to ECC standards, so ample parking for cars will be provided. This application should therefore not be approved on the basis that unrealistic assumptions have been made in terms of sustainable transport use and unsafe access for buses proposed onto Rickstones Road, and the impact of development traffic has not been demonstrated as not being severe. Therefore, this proposal does not comply with MPPF or Essex County Council's planning policies. Thank you.
Very much, indeed. Thank you. The next person wishing to make a statement is Councillor Michael Lager, who's speaking on behalf of Witham Town Council. Good evening.
Well, good evening, Madam Chairman and members. I'm here to underline the Town Council's reasons for asking you to refuse this application, particularly the cycleway proposal along Collingwood Road. Officers rejected an alternative along Almond Road and then turning left upwards towards the station as too narrow. Yet on the proposed route, just a little further up, the narrowest point will be under 1.5 metres wide, and how on earth did this bit get through? As usual, the report contains many judgments of planning officers as well as representations. As the LPA, you can decide what to regard as relevant material considerations and the appropriate weight in each case. In the view of the Town Council, the LPA should use these discretions to refuse this application. If, however, you are minded to grant consent, there are powerful reasons to change the Collingwood Road proposal. The Highways Authority may or may not approve the necessary TROs and roadworks, as the decision one way or the other lies entirely in the hands of the Cabinet member. Unwisely, perhaps, the Section 106 agreement still seeks to deliver Collingwood Road, which will be difficult, if not impossible, without these TROs and roadworks. And therefore we ask for less specific words to secure the cycling benefits in a better way. At the moment, the perception is that Collingwood Road scheme is being done to Witham, not for Witham. The district's cycling action plan describes several alternatives. One of these runs from Bellway's proposed route to the station, over the railway at Motts Lane, and then along Eastways in the industrial estate, passing under the Colchester Road to join the Blackwater Rail Trail, with easy access from there to the town centre. This alternative is clearly safer, it avoids traffic disruption and air pollution, it's easier to deliver, and it's cheaper. Last year, the committee approved major housing development at the Wood End Farm, with a financial contribution towards the Town Council's Cycleway and Footway renewal programme, to be spent by Witham Town Council. This approach is key as it puts responsibility for getting it right where it belongs, locally, within policy, but with regard to local knowledge. A similar provision should replace the Collingwood Road scheme. It would enable the alternative route just explained, and together with the sum to be contributed by Bellway for Riverwalk cycleway improvements in general, would link their development better with the Riverwalk. Now, trees and hedges on building sites in Witham have recently been removed unexpectedly. I strongly suggest that the tree protection plan required by Condition 23 should contain much more detail on the numerous hedges around the site to secure the protection of the Hedgerows Regulations 1997. Sadly, Bellway's Tree Constraints Report tells us very little about these hedges. In conclusion, many of the objections covered at the earlier meeting remain, but it is most important that the cycleway proposal along Collingwood Road should be removed in favour of an alternative better route, with the details in the hands of the Town Council, and that existing hedges should be better protected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lager. The next person wishing to make a statement is Councillor Bob Wright. He is the BDC Ward Councillor for the area, that area. We'll be speaking about.
Good evening, Madam Chairman and Councillors. I thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm objecting to this plan application as it is not an allocated site in the current local plan. We have a 5.1 year housing supply, so the new housing is not required. This development is not within the village envelope and will double the size of Rivenall, and it is contrary to the adopted local plan. This site was rejected by the LPC in 1998, 2005, 2011, 2014-15, 2017 and 2021. When Phase 1 was given planning permission, the houses was moved away from the John Ray Walk, Rectory Lane, as it was a protected quiet lane. You are now recommending building all along this lane. When Phase 3 was given planning permission, you voted to save the hedge. Now it is being recommended to remove 12 metres of the hedge to open a gap for a foot cycleway. This is not consistent. The buses are being diverted away from the older residents in Forest Road to the potentially younger residents in the new development. Policy RLP2 states that the new developments will be confined to town boundaries and village envelopes. The new development is in open countryside in Rivenall. Bellways want to protect the rural nature of the John Ray Walk. This is easily achieved. Vote to reject this site. Planning officers have stated that this will not affect the coalescence of Rivenall and Witten because planning permission has already been granted on the Bellway site. This will continue to affect the rural character of Rivenall as these houses are in open countryside. Rivenall is not getting any benefits whatsoever from this development. Even the proposed 106 money is being spent on facilities in the south of Witten. Rivenall and North Witten do not have a GP surgery, dentist, and with the exception of a pharmacy, any other health care facilities. The extra allotments and wildlife area in this proposal are already there, as they were proposed in Phase 1 and 2. If the cycle lane is approved, this feeds into the station entrance in Albert Road, when the cycle storage is in Easton Road. This storage is inadequate and there is currently an 8-year waiting list, which is not decreasing. Railtrack is also concerned that the increase of traffic across the unmanned crossing over the rail line at Cutthroat Lane on safety grounds. Bellways themselves do not apparently seem to be convinced that the cycle and walking will increase as they are proposed to add a car charging point to each house. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Wright. Next person wishing to make a statement is Mr. Oliver Spencer. He is the agent from Andrew Martin Plumbing. Mr. Spencer, please. Evening.
Good evening, councillors. I'm Olivier Spencer from Andrew Martin Planning and I represent Bellway Homes. As you may recall, the committee decided to defer this application in October to enable further consideration and consultation on the proposed Collingwood Road cycleway. My colleague Mr. Field will explain more about the extensive work we've undertaken in the last 4 months, including other options discussed with the Town Council. But before he does, it's worth noting that the proposed development and the cycle proposals are a result of over 2 years of discussions and meetings with the Council's officers and other local stakeholders. For much of this period, the Council was unable to demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and although this situation has improved, the supply remains marginal as demonstrated in recent appeal decisions. The applicant believes that the supply would benefit from being boosted further and that this application would make a sensible contribution in a sustainable location. With regard to social benefits, the proposals provide 230 new homes, including 69 affordable homes with a mix of apartments, houses and wheelchair bungalows, and will create well-designed and beautiful spaces in accordance with our vision statement and future design code. The proposals also provide new sports pitches and facilities as part of 18 acres of public open space, which is 3 times the policy requirement. In relation to the environment, the proposals will deliver a net gain in both biodiversity and trees on site, will incorporate a sustainable drainage system with an extra 40% allowance for climate change, will enhance sustainable forms of travel and will include renewable energy technology, an EV charging point and high-speed fibre broadband on every plot. For the economy, the proposals will support over 100 jobs on site during the construction phase and increased expenditure in local businesses once the development is complete.
Furthermore, the green buffer in the emerging Section 2 local plan, which is to prevent coalescence between Witham and Rivenhall, is not affected by these proposals. A draft Section 106 agreement has been prepared and will secure the following: a £2.5 million contribution for early years, primary and secondary school places, approximately £250,000 towards the new community centre at Maltings Lane, expanded provision at the Witham Health Centre and library services, a £2.1 million contribution for enhanced bus services in Witham and Rivenhall Parish, with greater frequency and earlier and later services, a new foot and cycleway along Rickstones Road, linking the site to the schools on Conrad Road, the closure of the southern part of Rectory Lane to vehicles, a new cycle scheme on Collingwood Road, and since being reported to the October committee, a £200,000 contribution towards improvements along the River Walk. Finally, the Council's officers have seen fit to recommend the scheme for approval. With this in mind, I respectfully request that members follow this advice and resolve to grant permission. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spencer. Thank you. The next person wishing to make a statement is Mr. Steve Field. He's from Ardent Highway. He's an Ardent Highway consultant, and he is appearing on behalf of the applicant.
Good evening, councillors. I'm Steve Field from Ardent Consulting Engineers and I represent the applicant Bellway Homes. The Collingwood Road cycle scheme forms the final section of a 3.5 kilometre long route that connects the proposed development to the town centre, rail station and schools at Conrad Road. The cycle scheme has been in development since October 2020 following an on-site meeting with Essex Highways and District Council officers at which Collingwood Road was firmly identified as the most suitable route between the station and town centre. Since the committee made a decision to defer, the applicant has engaged widely with local stakeholders regarding the cycle scheme. This included meetings with town councillors in November and January, an on-site meeting with representatives of the town council in November, and several meetings with Essex Highways and District Council officers. The applicant also offered to meet with Rivenhall Parish Council and wrote to all residents along the Collingwood Road route with details of the proposed scheme. Following the on-site meeting with representatives of the Town Council, the potential connection between Collingwood Road and River Walk via Goodhaven Valley was investigated and the scheme design prepared. However, this was not supported by Essex Highways for safety reasons. As this couldn't be achieved, the applicant proposes a £200,000 contribution towards improvements along the River Walk. Other alternatives were given due consideration following liaison with the Town Council, including a route via Eastways to the east of the town centre. However, this runs through an industrial estate and so is an undesirable environment for cyclists. A route extending north along the B1018 from Albert Road to Chipping Hill and onto the River Walk. However, there is insufficient highway land to provide protected space for cyclists. And a route along Albert Road to Whitehorse Lane, across the Chipping Hill and onto the River Walk. However, again, this would mainly require cycling on road, crossing the B1018 and junction visibility for cyclists emerging from Whitehorse Lane onto Chipping Hill is poor. Therefore, the proposed Collingwood Road cycle scheme is being pursued, as this is supported by Essex Highways, having been designed with the latest cycle design principles in LTN 120 at the forefront. All avenue-style trees along Collingwood Road, south of Goodhaven Valley, would be retained within the scheme. No resident parking would be lost or impeded. A number of time-limited parking bays would need to be removed to accommodate the step cycle lanes. However, alternative free or low-cost visitor parking is available elsewhere, including at the Newlands Drive car park, the Grove Shopping Centre car park, and on Newland Street. If members see fit to recommend the application for approval, a traffic regulation order will be required for the cycle scheme to progress. As per the Officers' Reports Committee, in the event a TRO is not secured prior to the commencement of development, a suitable alternative improvement scheme would then be agreed with Essex Highways and the District Council and provided by the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Right. We now come to the presentation, which is going to be made by Neil. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, members. Just before I start the presentation, I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that we've...
Your microphone is working properly. profits. That could be the reason. Thank you. That's better. Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies. Thank you. Good evening, members. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just before I start the presentation, I just wanted to make sure that all members are aware that this afternoon a letter was received from Priti Patel. A copy has been circulated to all members this evening. It doesn't raise any substantive new issues which aren't already covered in the report, so we won't go any further into that, but I wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that. So turning to the presentation, this is an application which we've received back in 2020. It came to committee in October of last year and it was deferred. Members asked that the applicant and officers reconsider the Collingwood Road cycle scheme, which, as was mentioned in question time, has been done, and we'll certainly come back to that later in the presentation. We have, however, presented a full report, and I will, as part of the presentation, run through the main issues, but I will focus more on the Collingwood Road scheme, perhaps than the previous presentation, as that is the item or the area which the application was deferred on, and hopefully that will assist members. So this is an outline application with all matters reserved for up to 230 dwellings, with public open space, includes grass sports pitches and facilities to serve them, a neighbourhood equipped area of play, other landscaping. Vehicular access is proposed via Forest Road and Evans Way, that's Forest Road is the existing highway prior to the Phase 1 development. Evans Way comes through Phase 1 development, which is being built out. Also proposed is a bus, cycle and pedestrian connections to Rickstones Road, along with sustainable urban drainage and landscaping. This is termed Phase 4, or land north-east of Rectory Lane, and the application site is in the parish of Rivenhall, although it is obviously to the north of the town of Witham. Apologies. So here's the red line of the application site. So you can see, if I just sort of orientate members quickly, so this is Rectory Lane, so this is the protected lane, which Councillor Wright referred to during question time, which was referred to. This is Phase 1 of the Bellway development off Forest Road being just down the bottom here. This is Phase 2, which is under construction as well. This is where Phase 3 is. This is the Bluebells development, which is referred to in the committee report. This is the location where the bus gate will run through, and these are the properties at Rickstones End, which you heard about at question time and referred to in the report. You can see the thin red lines along Rickstones Road. These relate to highway works for the improved pedestrian connectivity. But the main body of the application site is here. So we've got the golf course immediately to the north, housing to the south. The main line of the railway runs further to the south here, and then over here we've got a largely undeveloped area. This is the grounds of the rectory and the houses down here. So that's the location plan. So this is the updated draft allocation plan. So this isn't the adopted plan, but this is the post-hearing local plan. So it shows Witham North. So you can see this is the application site up here. The protected lane is shown with the dotted red line. The Phase 3 development is here. Phase 2 development is down here. This is the Eastways employment area, obviously on the other side of the railway line there. And then the other shading we've got here, this is the Conrad Road development over here. And then we've got the school sites here as well. And just zooming in a bit closer, we've obviously talked in the committee report about coalescence, and we've shown how we've assessed that. This is just coming in a bit closer, so we can see the main body of Rivenhall, the village, over here on the other side of the green buffer. This is the green buffer which covers the golf course and stretches beyond. And as you can see, the application site comes up to the edge of the green buffer in the draft local plan, but it doesn't actually breach it. So therefore, we will take the view that that is providing that or maintaining that green buffer, which is what's in the emerging local plan. So just a quick aerial photograph, just for further bearings. So you can see the the landscaping and the land moulding on the golf course to the north. See the phase 2 development being built out at the time the satellite image was taken. And you can see phase 3 being built over there as well. So there are a number of parameter plans that have been submitted with the application. So although all matters are reserved, and we are proposing that parameter plans are approved. So these will be the framework for the reserved matters if outline permission is granted. So the land use plan is probably one of the key ones. So you can see we have effectively 2 areas of built development, the sort of the bluey colours. You can see the road coming through, so we come up from Forest Road, up through the existing development, in through the woodland here, or around the edge of the woodland and in here, to access this parcel and this parcel. The road obviously will continue to serve the golf course up here. In terms of other points to point out on the land use plan, we've got open space called a landscape buffer to Rectory Lane down the side. We've got these green areas at the top here, which are the grass sports pitches with the bus gate or bus lane running through it. And we've got an allotment site or an extension to an existing allotment site, I should say, just down the bottom, this blue shaded area here. Got a play area or an existing play area here, which serves to develop the phase 1 and 2. The idea is that there will be additional play equipment provided as part of this phase of development, phase 4 development. It will be slightly different play equipment, or that's how it's envisaged. So that will complement and provide a wider range of play, which will serve the whole development. So there are a number of other parameter plans as well. They're obviously showing slightly different elements of the same thing. So this shows the different areas of open space that are proposed, including, sorry, I should have said, the suds attenuation basin and pond. Got a vehicular access plan, so you can see the idea of how the site will be served. So although access isn't being approved as part of this application, you can see the principles. So vehicular access for the development parcels will actually be in off Evans Way here, and there will be an entrance off Rickstones Road or entrance or exit off Rickstones Road here, but that would be restricted by a traffic regulation order, subject to that being made, which would restrict it to buses, motorcycles and private hire vehicles. The road network, the primary street or the spine road would run through the blue dotted line here. You can see the continued access, or the road which continues to provide access to the golf course running north there. Pedestrian access plan sort of builds on that, just showing the various points where footways are proposed to provide connections. So most notably, in terms of connections beyond the site, you can see there's a connection coming out here onto Rectory Lane. That's the connection there, which would then allow pedestrians to walk up to Rickstones Road. That's one of the improvements along Rickstones Road, which we'll come back to later. But that's what that plan is showing. And then we've got a Storey Heights plan showing predominantly 2-storey development with up to 2.5-storey running through parallel to the spine road in the middle, which is not uncommon in terms of urban design to give that sort of placemaking and greater legibility, but certainly nothing higher than 2.5-storey proposed. And then there's a master plan showing how the phase 4 development could knit together with the phase 1 and 2. So we're not actually approving this, but it's just to give an impression of how the site could be laid out and how the development could work. So you can see you've got a primary street there with sufficient space to have a sort of tree-lined arrangement running through, and then a number of slower order streets coming off, serving development parcels, running down to sort of private drives, presumably towards the edges. But like I said, we're not approving that, but just for information and illustrative master plan. Also illustrative sports pitches. So I mentioned those in terms of the land use. So this site is proposing the transfer of, or the setting out, I should say, of grass sports pitches, which would then be transferred to the district council, along with a changing pavilion and appropriate car parking. The illustrative layout here shows how the two pitches could be accommodated on there. Isn't to say that's how they would be done. We would consult through the reserve matters with bodies like the FA and our own leisure team as to how that might best be done, but that's just to give members an impression of how that area at the top of the site could be set out. There is, as you have read in the committee report, a vision statement accompanying the application. I won't go into that in any detail. Suffice it to say, it's been subject of considerable discussion with officers, and a lot of work and revisions have been made. Officers have worked hard to try and raise the quality of built development with this document, and we think this sets up a good aspirational level, and this is certainly something which, if approved, we would expect the developer to be working towards and be evidencing how they're complying with this as part of subsequent reserve matters. We have also got information from the applicant with regards to tree removal or tree removal and tree retention. So there was two documents, one submitted which members would have seen before October, an updated or a further supplementary report has been provided with additional photos to illustrate some of the areas of trees that are being removed and provide further explanation for removals. Would stress that this is all illustrative material because all matters are reserved, so there is some flexibility with some of these elements, but the applicant has sought to set out the likely extent of losses and the explanation as to why that is, and that's gone into in some detail in the committee report, so I won't run through that as part of the presentation, but suffices to say there are tree losses and some loss of hedgerow as well, but there's also considerable scope for additional planting, and we think that the tree loss and hedge loss that is proposed is appropriate in terms of bringing forward the site and planning the development in an appropriate manner. In terms of ecology, again covered in the committee report, but just in terms of the headlines, there are reptiles, protected species on site at the back of the allotment site, just at the bottom. These would need to be translocated, and there is within the 106 provisions for that to be done within the application site. So the protected species would be trapped, relocated within an area where habitats will be provided which are suitable for them. So no objection to that approach from our ecologist. In terms of bats, there is bat activity observed on the site, which is discussed. The main issue that remains will be that there is a dead tree which would need to be removed as part of the bus gate provision. Because of that tree being covered in ivy, it wasn't possible for that tree to be surveyed, but it does have bat roost potential, so there is a condition which covers that to make sure that survey is carried out. And obviously the tree couldn't be removed if it is providing a bat roost, so that's covered by condition. So those are the principal ecology issues. There are the potential for skylight plots on the site, but those are being mitigated, and that's covered through the section 106 as well. So moving on to other issues, the bus gate and the access onto Rickstones Road was discussed at question time and has obviously raised concerns. So this is the existing entrance to the commercial premises which was referred to. And a couple of photos just to show the context. So this is the existing arrangement. That's looking away, going away from Witham. And then that's looking back towards, so the actual entrance is just down here, so it's looking back towards. So you can see the bend that was referred to during question time. And then this is the sort of the other side of the bend. So this is Rectory Lane here. So this is coming from Witham, so you can see coming around there. So as we've explained in the committee report, the bus gate has been designed and has been assessed by the Highway Authority. Visibility displays have been demonstrated that can be provided within the extent of highway land. That does cross the neighbour's property, so that was, I think, mentioned by Councillor Wright. So the visibility display is demonstrated within the drawings to be within highway land, so that's sort of coloured or shaded yellow on the plans, so it can be provided. Because it's highway land, that does mean that the land can't be, although it may be privately owned, it can't be obscured, or sorry, it can't be obstructed, I should say. So whereas with a normal front garden, somebody could maybe build a boundary wall up to their front boundary, because of the highway land designation, they're not able to provide that or put that obstruction within the visibility space, so that can be achieved within highway land and land that the applicant controls. So just going back, I should have said, so there is a proposal on this side where you can see the vegetation on the side and the fence line. That will be pulled back to improve visibility, looking back towards the bend. So that's how the visibility can be achieved in that direction. So suitable visibility in both directions, and also there is a concern, we've heard concerns about the ability for buses to turn in and out of the junction safely. So there is tracking that's been provided which shows the bus can turn out from the bus gate into Rickstones Road safely and without oversailing the centre line. And also in terms of buses waiting to turn in, there is sufficient visibility or sufficient forward visibility demonstrated in the plans to show that vehicles exiting Witham would see the bus and would have sufficient time to adjust their speed or brake accordingly. So that although we understand the concerns in terms of safety, the junction has been assessed to be safe, and therefore officers have no objection to that. So moving along from the bus gate, Rickstones Road is also subject to improvements to the footway. So there's a relatively narrow footway on the side of the road adjacent to the Special Educational Needs School, Chatham House, which has been recently built. What's proposed is that footway is widened for the benefit of children walking from this development and indeed other developments towards either the Chatham House School or the other schools on Conrad Road. So there would be an uncontrolled crossing point coming out from the Bluebells development. So residents from Phase 4 development would come out onto Rectory Lane, which is a quiet lane, walk up to the Bluebells development, walk through a shared pedestrian cycle path. A hole would be provided in the hedge. Don't think it was as wide as Councillor Wright was suggesting. It would be 4 metres wide, and it would be through an existing stretch of hedge, not the translocated hedge, but there is hedge removal there, and then that would provide a potential crossing point, an uncontrolled crossing point on Rickstones Road, which would then allow pedestrians to cross over and then continue along the widened pedestrian cycleway along Rickstones Road towards the schools. In terms of the site, these are some photos of the site. So this is in the northwest corner looking east. So you can see there's a construction compound within the field at the moment, which is being used in connection with the Phase 3 development, but previously the whole field was in agricultural use. And then that's looking from the maintenance track, which runs across the middle of the site, looking north. So those are the properties at Rickstones End that you can see at the top end of the photo there. And then this is looking south again from the maintenance track. So this is sort of the centre of the site, and this is the edge of the existing development that you can see back down there. This is Rectory Lane running along the side here. This is a footpath which runs through the central woodland belt, so you can see quite densely planted. Wasn't, I think, planted with probably amenity in mind, but there is some limited access through there at the moment. But then this is looking back through, so this is looking from the woodland belt as you come out, and then the footpath that runs back across the site, and then vice versa. And then another view again from the footpath looking east towards Rectory Lane. So there is, as I said, the proposals for the play area to be increased. So there's an existing play area that's being provided by the developer, and what's proposed is an area of this woodland would be cleared to increase the area for the play to go in. So it gives it a sort of semi-natural feel as well. And then this is just looking along the southern boundary, so looking past the existing development and again looking towards Rectory Lane. This is a section of Rectory Lane itself, so a protected lane. This was obviously in leaf, so there are slightly more open views out from Rectory Lane, obviously during the autumn and the winter months. But this is a sort of representation of it, sort of in leaf during the spring or the summer. So you can see very, very narrow, but very attractive, quite well used by dog walkers and cyclists, lightly trafficked, but there are proposals to further restrict vehicular access, which I shall come back to later. And then this is just a photo, so this is where the footpath comes out from Rectory Lane, so there's a public right-of-way which runs across, obviously. So you can see phase 1 just on the side there to the right. Another photo of Rectory Lane, so this is just before the bend in the road, so about halfway up. So this will be where a turning area is created, so as part of the proposals to manage traffic on Rectory Lane, turning areas to be provided, so I'll just point that out on this photo. This is the old rectory, so a listed building adjacent to the site, so you can see well set back in substantial grounds, fairly well screened. So in terms of heritage impact, that's covered in the committee report, so I won't go into that again, but this is just in terms of context. And then a further view across the site. There are, as I mentioned earlier, a number of trees which are proposed to be removed or are indicated as potentially being removed, I should say, as part of the indicative removal. So some of these are trees on the edge of the golf course, and these are just some images here where the applicant's report has also provided further images, and some of them close up, so you can see where some of the trees are failing or where there are issues which mean that they're not suitable for being transplanted. There are a couple of quality trees in amongst this particular group, and the applicant has proposed that they are transplanted within the site. So those trees which are worth retaining and replanting will be, but the majority of these trees are shown to be removed due to quality. So in terms of drawings, so just picking up on some of the issues that came up during the photos. So this is the bus gate or bus gate entrance into Rickstones Road. So you can see the blue dotted lines show the visibility displays in both directions. So this is where you can see on the Witten side the hedge will need to be removed, a section of hedge and the fence line pulled back. Landscaping could be dealt with, or re-landscaping of that area could be dealt with through reserved matters. But the point for this, for what we're considering at the moment, is that safe access can be provided. And again, you can see the forward visibility that I was talking about earlier. So if a vehicle was waiting to turn into the bus gate here, you have got that forward visibility coming out of Witham. So that has been safe. We have referred the proximity of the bus gate to the neighbouring properties. So that was something which was picked up at the previous committee, so that is covered. And again, reserved matters could consider boundary treatments and landscaping for the intervening sort of space between that property and the bus gate. The bus gate would be restricted, so there would be traffic enforcement cameras to make sure it's only used in accordance with its permitted use. And as I said, that would be restricted to buses, motorcycles and private hire vehicles, so not likely to be a regular sort of flow of traffic or vehicle movements going down there. So it's not a main vehicular access to the site, and it's not proposed either as a construction access to the site, I should stress. So it is sort of cognizant of the fact that it is relatively close to neighbouring properties. So just in terms of pedestrian connectivity, so I was talking about the path along Rickstones Road, so just to highlight that on this plan. So one of the proposals is through the 106 that occupants will be able to walk out from the development here onto Rectory Lane, cross into the Bluebells development over here. This is a path that runs through the Bluebells development, through that gap in the hedge that I referred to, the 4-metre gap, cross on Rickstones Road, and then carry on along Rickstones Road up to Conrad Road, where you've got the Rickstones Academy and other schools further along. And in terms of other connections, we've got cycle connections and pedestrian connectivity as well coming out from the south, and I'll come back to that in a moment. So plans showing the Rickstones Road proposals. I won't run through that, it's quite a busy slide, but I can come back to it if need be. But there is a package of works to improve pedestrian and cycling facilities along Rickstones Road. Rectory Lane, this is what I was referring to. So this is that photo I was referring to was looking up here, that tree on the corner. The proposal is that Rectory Lane has a restriction put in here, which has a traffic regulation order approved. So that will prevent through traffic. So vehicles will be prohibited from using this southern section of the lane. So it only can be used by pedestrians and cyclists. And then the northern part of the lane, access is retained off Rickstones Road, and the turning head is necessary so that any vehicles coming down here which need to can turn and get out. So there is that intervention within Rectory Lane, but we think that is, on balance, an acceptable intervention given the benefits of restricting vehicle access over the rest of it and the additional landscaping that can be provided as a buffer. So in terms of cycle connectivity, that's a similar plan to what I've shown before, but it does sort of lead on to this cycle route from the development running down parallel to the railway line towards the town centre. And as the applicant's transport consultant explained, when we're talking about the Collingwood road scheme, which I'll come on to shortly, we are looking at that as part of a longer route from the site. So the Collingwood road scheme hasn't been designed in isolation and isn't designed to be a freestanding thing. It is intended to be an extension to what was previously been approved by the council in terms of cycle connectivity. So you can see cycle paths within the existing development continue down, and a cycle path will be provided through this open space adjacent to the railway line onto by Mott's Lane, by the Bridleway Bridge over the railway line. It will, rather than going over the railway line and over that Bridleway Bridge, it will continue down Cutthroat Lane, which is open to vehicular traffic, but is very lightly trafficked and really principally used, I think, for servicing of the substation and allotments, and not a great deal more. Does go over the level crossing on the Braintree branch line, but then continues down towards the station. So that's a sort of really quite lightly trafficked or completely segregated cycle lane, sort of combination of those things coming down towards the station. And then what the Collingwood road scheme is proposing as part of this application is trying to improve that connectivity on from the station down towards the town centre. So that these diagrams try and explain in a little bit more detail what is proposed with the Collingwood road scheme. So it comes out from Albert Road. So here, because of restricted highway land availability, it's proposed that this will be made, this existing footway will be made a shared pedestrian cycleway, so cyclists can cycle on the pavement if they choose to. They can still cycle in the road if they want to, if they're a confident cyclist. But there's the opportunity for less confident cyclists to use that shared facility. There's an additional Toucan crossing, which has been provided here. Just to reiterate, the existing Toucan crossing on the other side of Albert Road will be retained. It's not been removed. So this is an additional crossing here. The lights on the two crossings will be phased, so they talk to each other. So you won't find a situation where you stop at one set of lights, move through, and then stop at the other set of lights. They will be talking to each other and phased accordingly. The cyclists can then cross over, carry on down a shared route here to Goodhaven Valley. So there is an appropriate width for a shared space or shared pedestrian cycle space coming down this route here to Goodhaven Valley. There isn't room within the highway to provide segregated cycle lanes, or if the segregated lanes were provided, that would be the expense of road space. And given this is a bus route and has HGV traffic, on balance, we need to retain the carriageway width to carry that traffic. The shared facility comes down to Goodhaven Valley, and then cyclists would need to cross Goodhaven Valley, over the crossing here, and then over the road. So this is where the Jubilee tree is, that members will be aware of. So crossings here, uncontrolled crossing points, but drop curbs, and then onto a shared pedestrian cycleway, again on either side of Collingwood Road, coming down here, and then where road space allows, we're creating segregated cycle lanes, step cycle lanes running down here. We can see the red lines down almost as far as Newlands Drive, running on both sides of the road. At the end of the segregated cycle lanes, cyclists would need to rejoin the carriageway, and that would be subject to detailed design and obviously would be subject to further safety audits, but we believe that can be provided in a safe manner. None of the trees along Collingwood Road, the avenue trees, are proposed for removal, which I know was a concern that was previously raised. There are, however, 3 trees which may need to be removed by Eastern Road. So 2 ash trees and an apple tree, highlighted in red, so not particularly clear, but these ones here. These may need to be removed to provide suitable visibility displays for the crossing. So we put them on as being removed because there is a likelihood that they may be removed. But if the Highway Authority can be satisfied that any of them can be retained and sufficient visibility can be provided, then the trees will be removed. But we're sort of presenting worst case. So worst case is those 3 trees may need to be removed. In terms of the crossing at Cliffhaven Valley, concerns have been raised about the junction and just how traffic behaves around that and whether there is a better option there. The designer of the scheme has looked at whether alternative crossing facilities could be provided for cyclists, which would give cyclists better priority over motorists. The problem or the concern is that it wouldn't be safe to do so. Traffic coming off Collingwood Road and coming down the hill here may not have enough time to react to a pedestrian crossing who thinks they have priority here. So we think it's better not to have that priority given to cyclists here on balance as a safety consideration, and cyclists will cross when they consider it to be safe to. So it certainly has been considered whether that junction could be improved or tightened up or greater priority given to cyclists. But we think on balance this is the best and the safest solution. So there's some additional photos, just the photos of the trees which are potentially being removed in the top right there. But then this is looking down Collingwood Road, so you can see the avenue trees. So those are all proposed to be retained. And then this is an image which has been provided by the applicant just to show what the segregated cycle lanes could look like. So you can see them showing here. So the pedestrian footway has a retained curb line, and then there's a low curb adjacent to the highway. So the hatching would probably be removed here, but the carriageway width would be retained as appropriate for a bus route and to take HGV traffic. The provision of the cycle lanes would, however, mean that the parking bays along the road would need to be removed. That is subject to a TRO. There are approximately 20 parking bays with restricted time waiting on them along Collingwood Road. And as you'll have read, those are used or reported to be used by people using the surgery on Collingwood Road, but also a number of businesses. And there's also further down Collingwood Road, the public hall and a nursery. So there are a number of commercial activities as well as obviously the residential properties along Collingwood Road. So in terms of the scheme, we have discussed it at some considerable length with the applicant. We have met with the Town Council as well to explain that. We still believe, having considered alternative routes which have been suggested, included a detailed assessment of the Almond Road scheme, which the Town Council suggested, and which was ruled out due to safety concerns because there is a driveway adjacent to a property, which could potentially see a motorist reversing out onto a shared facility there with no visibility at all. So the reason it wasn't that the footway wasn't wide enough, it was that there was a fundamental safety concern. So that's why the Almond Road scheme wasn't pursued. But the other alternative schemes have been considered, and we don't believe they offer better cycling opportunities than this scheme. We think they have issues with them which weigh against them. The Collingwood Road scheme, we think on balance is the better scheme. There are compromises that have had to be made because we've had to design a scheme within the constraints. So we've had to maintain the carriageway width. We have had to look at the other constraints around there. So we are trying to balance things, but we've tried to design it so far as is practical in accordance with the principles of LTM 120. And as I said, officers still feel that's the best cycling scheme that we should be securing. The applicant has, in addition though to the Collingwood Road scheme, agreed to make a financial contribution of £200,000, which Whittam Town Council could use towards improvements to the Riverwalk. So that's a reflection or acknowledges the importance of the River Walk as a cycle corridor within the town for leisure as well as some sort of commuting trips. We don't think it's a particularly attractive route all year round because it's not lit. So certainly with dark evenings and at night, it wouldn't be attractive to all users, which restricts its use. But certainly during the day and for some trips, it does have value, and that's why the financial contribution is made. So we're not being overly prescriptive or suggesting we be overly prescriptive on how that's spent, but we do think it should be spent within the centre of the River Walk, where residents from this development might be cycling in the future. But that's a principal change from when the application was reported previously. I think just also to sort of a couple of points to stress. In terms of the safety, this scheme has been subject to a Stage 1 road safety audit. Sorry, tripped over my words. And that has been undertaken by Essex County Council. So I know some members are sometimes sceptical about some reports which are produced by applicants, but in fairness, in terms of the safety audit of this scheme, that's been carried out by the County Council, who are obviously independent, and there was no fundamental flaws within that which indicated that the scheme should not be pursued. So we do believe that the scheme is safe and should be part of the mitigation that is being provided as part of this development. So in terms of the Section 106, moving on from the cycling, I won't go through all of the heads of terms they're reported in the committee, but just to say it is quite an extensive package of elements that are being provided, as well as the usual affordable housing. There are an extension to the allotment site, RAMS payments and skylight mitigation as required, extensive contributions in terms of a river walk, public transport, and extensive highway works to improve pedestrian and cycle connectivity. There's also the grass sports pitches being provided on site, generous public open space, and additional financial contributions towards community buildings, education, health, and libraries. There are a couple of additional conditions which I just wanted to draw to members' attention. So I mentioned when we were talking about the illustrative tree removals, a couple of those trees on the edge of the golf course, 2 pine trees, were identified as being of good quality by the applicant's arboriculturalist and are proposed therefore for relocation. So we've got a condition to make sure that is done in an appropriate manner. And then there was 2 additional conditions which were reported. So one was to make sure that we had details of solar photovoltaic panels. So that's being proposed for every dwelling. So that's something which I know members are continually challenging officers and developers over. So very pleased that that's been taken on board by the developer here, and that commitment, or that condition, catches that commitment. I did propose condition 42 about electric vehicle charging. So that's in the committee report, but that's my mistake. I got a bit overzealous there and missed the fact we actually had it as a condition already, so it's already covered by condition 13. So apologies for the confusion between my committee report and the conditions. But again, just to stress something which members are continually asking for, rightly so, the applicant is committing to providing an electric smart charging appliance or fixture for each dwelling within the development. So again, something which we are usually unable to secure, but another benefit of the development. So in terms of a summary, members will probably be pleased if I draw to a close. But to say the proposal conflicts with the development plan as a whole, as we've acknowledged. Within it, it is outside the existing development boundary and the proposed development boundary in the emerging local plan. So we have considered that, and that is obviously something which needs to be carefully considered. However, we do think this is a sustainable location, and the package of measures which has been provided by the applicant will provide a genuine choice of transport modes. I think one of the speakers at Question Time says that people won't be forced to walk and cycle everywhere. Well, quite so, and they won't be. The best that we can ever do with a development is provide attractive choices. So here we think there will be a genuine range of choices, bus service, walking, cycling for people, so that they may well have a car, they may well need to use their car, but there will be alternatives for shorter journeys within the town. Part of the reason for having the bus gate, I should add, is that actually it provides some additional flexibility in terms of the bus service. So it's not actually agreed as to how the bus service is improved. An existing service might be diverted might be augmented or a new service might be provided. But the idea is that having the bus gate actually provides greater flexibility and is more likely to provide a sustainable long-term service after the applicant's public transport contribution has been exhausted. But the committee report goes on to set out the required planning balance exercise that needs to be undertaken, whereby we've weighed harms against benefits, and there are numerous harms on this, we acknowledge, but there are also very substantial public benefits as well. So when we've done that exercise with a flat planning balance, because we do have a marginal 5-year housing land supply at present, or we believe we can evidence a marginal housing land supply at present, we think that on balance the application should be approved. We think on a flat balance it is acceptable and should be supported as sustainable development, and therefore the officer recommendation is that we approve subject to section 106. There was just a couple of points that I wanted to pick up from question time, because I was making some notes where I don't think we'd covered things perhaps adequately within the report. So if you can just bear with me while I try and pick those up. I think in terms of Councillor Lager made a couple of points which I just want to come back on. So the Almond Road scheme, I think as I mentioned, was rejected because of that safety issue with the property. So it certainly was considered carefully by the applicant's transport consultant, and they discussed it at some length with the Highway Authority, so it certainly wasn't dismissed lightly, but that's what's led to the financial contribution for the Riverwalk being offered in lieu of that link. So some other link maybe could be provided elsewhere to the Riverwalk, or the actual Riverwalk improved itself. With regards to the wording within the 106 for the cycle improvements, we still think the cycle scheme, the Collingwood Road cycle scheme, is preferred and should be supported. So we think the 106 should be quite specific, and we do want the developer to do that. But obviously, less specific wording could be looked at if necessary. But strongly believe that cycle scheme should be supported. With regards to the condition around trees, condition 23, Councillor Lager's concern about hedges. I don't think it specifically refers to hedges. I think it's usually taken as read that where we get a tree report, it does consider hedges. But if members were concerned about that, we could add the word hedges to that condition. What else did I have? Just on the hedge removal on Rickstones Road, I think I mentioned that, but that's a 4 metre length of hedge that's been removed approximately, not 12 metres. And I think that's possible because of the way that the curvature of the road, where the crossing comes out. So actually people coming out would get good visibility in both directions. Sometimes you have to remove hedges to either side to get the required visibility. But that's not necessary in this case. And I think I've covered the rest of the points. Sorry if that's a long presentation. We've tried to cover the main points, but I appreciate we haven't gone into everything in great detail. Obviously, I'd be happy to take any questions, and Chris would obviously help as well, should members require any further assistance or have any further queries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil, for quite a detailed presentation. I made loads of notes when the public was speaking. There's one thing I would like, there's three things I'd like to ask before I open up to members. There was comment that Railtrack have concerned about the additional crossing. Have Railtrack been in contact with officers over that item?
No, we haven't had any. Haven't had anything from Railtrack. I know we did discuss the phase 1 and phase 2 with them at some length. I can remember meeting them on site, their representative. I think from recollection, Railtrack's position on Network Rail, as they are now, would be their preference would be that level crossing would be closed. They don't want ever any level crossings anywhere, and that would be their starting point. Obviously, that's not possible here. They did talk at one point about whether it would be feasible to put a bridge over the railway line, but that was discounted. So they did an assessment at the time, which I can recall, where they looked at the number of likely pedestrian movements, and their assessment was the increase in risk wasn't significant, and they didn't object previously. And I don't believe the additional dwellings that would be provided here would sort of tip that sort of calculation of that assessment that they did previously. So hopefully that answers that one.
And a question from myself, was the bicycle or the cycle lanes scheme brought to a conclusion before the new highway code came into force? Because the highway code now is giving additional width to vehicles when you're overtaking cyclists. And I was looking at the plan, and I don't know that you've got that additional width that the the car driver has to give the cyclist. This came into force, 2 weeks ago, the new highway code, I do believe, and it's giving far more, perhaps this is something for Martin to answer. Please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Hope you can hear me okay.
Yes.
I think the highway code, if I'm right, refers to you should allow at least 1.5 metres to pass a cyclist, whatever road you're in.
Yes.
So if the road is not wide, it's narrow, you should hold back behind the cyclist until you can get past safely.
I was just looking at the Collingwood Road one, wondering if there was one. I'm not very good on measurements, but it was something I just needed to know. And there's one other thing for Neil. You mentioned a tree near the bus gate that has not been surveyed because of the ivy on it. If it is a butt roost and it can't be removed, what will happen to the bus gate?
So the bus gate in its form as it's designed couldn't be provided if the tree is retained.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've got a couple of questions before I speak to this. Could Neil please put up the red line slide again, please? Thank you. So at the last meeting I did raise, but I don't think it's been picked up, the very top left red line is an option for widening the footway there, which is also a public right-of-way, approaching the public right-of-way, to make way for pedestrian, cyclist, mixed use. If that happened, the significant number of trees would have to come down there. Where that top left-hand little sliver is, it goes through like a tree tunnel, and it hasn't been picked up by officers, and it hasn't been picked up, I don't think, by the applicants. So there would be further loss of trees that are not quantified. Could he now please put up the slide for the looking towards the bus gate access from the Rectory Lane junction? Sorry, the actual photograph. No. That one. Okay, so the County Council believes that that's a safe access. Just beyond that bend is where the bus gate would come out. They don't appear to have taken into account the fact that brick wall is going to stay there, and those trees. The reduction in the trees is on the other side of that, and anyone who lives local knows how tight that bend is. You take your life in your hands coming out of Rectory Lane on a bike or on foot or in a car. In fact, the only way you can do it safely in a car is to wind your windows down and listen for the traffic, because they come around that bend so fast. So I simply do not believe that that is a safe access. Third one, could you please, and this is my final request, Neil, for that slide, could you please put up this slide for the Collingwood Road cycling at the Jubilee Oak? That's fine, yeah. So it's not clear to me how that crossing there of the Jubilee Oak would work. Currently, the Jubilee Oak tree has a very nice ornamental bench all the way around it, a metal bench, which was refurbished not that long ago, actually, after it was hit by a car. The space around that on that island is quite limited. So first question related to that, would that bench survive this scheme? Second thing, no one in their right mind crosses where that right-hand blue arrow is. All local people know you don't cross that road there because it's far too dangerous because of the speed of the traffic coming down from the station direction. Third point is, Councillor Largo mentioned this, and I'm not absolutely clear. I did look at the plans again today. Where the cycle lane goes up from there on the left-hand side towards the railway station, is it the intention to narrow the existing carriageway width of Collingwood Road? That's the question.
So, answer to the questions. The bench which runs around the tree is being retained. I think that was raised as an issue, so that's been raised. So, sorry, that's been saved or retained, I should say. So what will happen is, in terms of the crossing, there will be drop curbs put in, and the cyclist would dismount, cross the road using the island where the tree is, and then cross over. In terms of visibility, well, notwithstanding what Councillor Abbott's saying about concerns locally, there is considered to be adequate visibility in both directions to cross at that position. So that's how the scheme is intended to work. So you'd come down on the road, carriageway on the main road at the top. I don't think is subject to widening. I think there's some verge which would be used further up to make the path wider. You come down to Goodhaven Valley, cross with the drop curves over the island, past the bench, and cross over there.
Well, are officers sure about that? Because when I read the plans, it said that Collingwood Road is going to be narrowed along that section between the Goodhaven Valley junction and the Labour Hall in order to provide a 3-metre cycleway footway. So I'm looking. I think this is actually crucial to this whole scheme, because I think a mistake's been made. If that's the case, then Collingwood Road will have to be narrowed by 1.5 metres at that point. Now, that's a bus route, and I think that's going to bring buses potentially into conflict. If it's not the case, and the existing carriageway width remains, the existing footway width remains as it is now, between Goodhaven Valley and the Labour Hall, I can concur with what Councillor Lager said. I went out with a steel tape myself and measured it, and at its narrowest point it is 1.5 metres wide. That would clearly fail any assessment for a safe shared cycleway footway. Furthermore, there are 2 street-light columns and a telegraph pole in the footway, which further narrow it and provide obstacles. And as we know, moving streetlights or telegraph poles is very costly. There is no opportunity for widening the path on the existing alignment, because you're hard up against the front gardens. They're very small, of the houses there, which some of them have metal railings and walls. I also measured the entirety of that width. It's less than 2 metres for most of the length I've just described, and you only get to 3 metres width when you get up to the Labour Hall, or when you come down to where it widens out near where that left-hand blue arrow is. So if officers are saying, and I think they are, that the carriageway width is not going to be altered, then the shared footway cycleway will be 1.5 up to 2 metres wide, which is well under standard and clearly dangerous, because you will have obvious conflict between pedestrians and cyclists.
Right, Neil, would you like to come back, please?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Abbott, and apologies, members, I've misled you or misadvised you there. So that there is localised narrowing of the carriageway at that top end of Collingwood Road to create that shared facility. But when the scheme has been designed, the road width has been designed to maintain a minimum of 6.75 metres, which is what the Essex Design Guide says is required in terms of serving a bus route or carrying the type of traffic that we're looking at here. So apologies, that's my fault. I misspoke, to use a current term. But yes, sorry, there will be some localised narrowing of the carriageway to widen the footway so that we get the required width for a shared facility.
Okay, well that's clear. So the road is going to be narrowed. So that must mean that Collingwood Road's got to be narrowed by 1.5 metres. It's not wide there now. There's a very short chevron section in the middle. That chevron section would have to completely disappear, and the existing lanes would have to be narrowed beyond their existing width. I think so I was asking either way, and the officers have confirmed that Collingwood Road is going to have to be narrowed by by up to 1.5 metres along that entire stretch, and I think that raises significant questions about safety on the carriageway itself. Thank you, officers, for those responses. To my main speech, this site is a major incursion into the rural Rivenhall parish and is an unallocated site, as officers have confirmed. As Councillor Wright said, the local plan committee rejected this site on numerous occasions, and the officers referred to twice specifically in 2016, and it was decided not to allocate the site. That cannot be simply dismissed. As we discussed at the last meeting, a huge amount of work went into the local plan committee, and then just to suddenly turn around and say, well, that doesn't matter, I don't think it's acceptable. The site comes up to about 700 metres from the centre of Rivenhall, and as officers say, 400 metres from the nearest edge of the main part of Rivenhall. By comparison, it is over 2 kilometres away from Witham Town Centre, and the nearest GP surgery is 2 kilometres away. In other words, this is much, much closer to Rivenhall than it is to Witham. No on-site key services are proposed, so once again, this is another housing estate on a greenfield site that would require residents to travel significant distances to access services. Now, the County Council says it's well positioned, sustainably positioned. I don't think they know the local geography. Because you're not providing any on-site services, you're going to have to go off-site for everything, whether you're in a car, on foot, or on a bike. And the actual distances to most of them are significant. They're the distances where a lot of people, particularly in wintertime, for example, will need to drive. Notably, as has been already picked up, there is no GP practice in either Rivenhall or Witham North. And whilst the report says there's no objection from the NHS also says that this development would be unsustainable without a Section 106 payment. Now, as members know, and I and other members in the area raise on a regular basis, we're accruing these Section 106 payments, that there has been no improvement to NHS services in the Witham area. None. The clinic that's been talked about for a decade has not been built. So all this will do is put more pressure on existing GP services. The application is described as Phase 4, as if it was a planned development. It's not. It's an unallocated site. It's a speculative site. They could call it Phase Z. It doesn't matter. It's not an allocated site. And this is in addition to the over 600 houses that are already built or under construction at allocated or permitted sites at Forest Road, Conrad Road, and at Rickstones Road, Rivenhall. Paragraph 4.1 of the officer report sets out the harms, and they're very extensive. It's a very extensive list. I won't read them all out, Madam Chairman, because members, I'm sure, have read the report in full, but there's a very extensive list of reasons why this application is contrary to policy, and the first one is the most important. It's not allocated to a development and lies beyond any designated town or village development boundary in either the adopted local plan or the draft Section 2 plan. The balancing benefits that are concluded to tip the balance in favour of approval are set out, but as I've already demonstrated, and as many speakers have said, they are at best uncertain. Notably, the proposed cycle route is fraught with problems, and the applicants themselves admit in their letter that was sent to all councillors that alternatives were sought via local dialogue but were rejected by Essex County Council, who are sticking to the Collingwood Road scheme. But that would require a traffic regulation order, and there's no guarantee that would succeed. So I think there's a dilemma here for members to consider tonight. If the Collingwood Road scheme is uncertain, requiring TRO with all the problems we've all raised, and the County Council has rejected alternatives, then there's a significant risk of non-delivery if the alternatives have already been rejected. And in fact, all matters on this application are reserved, even the actual access. So the amount of certainty we've got on this development is extremely low. And if I can refer members to page 82 of the officer report, where it says, there is an outlying possibility that the control crossing on Rickstones Road, the bus loop through the sports pitches, and the step cycle along Collingwood Road may not come into fruition at all or in the ideal forms shown. So we would be granting, if we grant this tonight, 230 houses with significant risk that those benefits were never delivered. The TRO process would need to take its course, naturally, but from the outset, Essex County Council has demonstrated a failure to address real-world issues. I strongly support the new cycle routes. I'm on the BDC cycling group, but this proposal does not meet objectives on so many levels. Firstly, and specifically to this Collingwood Road section, it removes all of the free 2-hour parking that has been well used for many decades for residents. Now, it's almost dismissed out of hand what those parking spaces are used for. Local people know what they're used for. They're used for the doctor's surgery, for example, because often the doctor's surgery has already got too many cars in it, so people can't get in. It's used for the public hall, for events, extensively. It's used for the day nursery. It's used for the Citizen Advice Bureau, and it's used for people to park conveniently to go down to the town centre to the shops, where we're supposed to be supporting the town centres. I heard the representative from, was it Ardent, say that, oh, well, the alternative is they can go and park in the town centre. Can they? Have you tried to park in Witham town centre? If you remove these, all these parking bays, it will have a significant effect in reducing all of that parking and access. The plans to introduce a second controlled crossing on the railway bridge, I appreciate the point made about the phasing of the lights, but that is the most congested peak time location in the whole of Witham. What that will result in is even more problems for people trying to get in and out of Eastern Road, and further congestion down the Avenue and Collingwood Road. Every night in the week, those roads are chocker. Every single night. It can take 10, 15 minutes to get through that part of Witham, Friday night being the worst. And amazingly, the County Council have not addressed the main desire line for pedestrians. The main desire line for pedestrians is the crossing just to the right of that mini roundabout at the top of the avenue. And that has been dangerous for decades. And when I was County Council, I tried to get something done about it. They've absolutely ignored that main point. In terms of the conversion of the public right-of-way to shared use in Rivenhall, the officer didn't mention, but the Ramblers have actually written in and don't support it because they don't think it's safe. What officers have confirmed in the report, although I don't believe Neil did verbally tonight, was that I was correct when I said that if that does happen, a further section of hedge along Rickstones Road near the junction of Forest Road will have to be removed in order to achieve the 3-metre width. On page 61, Essex County Council states, I'll find it, the location of development is crucial to achieving key MPF objectives. It should be in close proximity to services and facilities. It's not. This site is not close to those facilities. The Highway Authority accepts the proposal is likely to generate additional trips, but they're not quantified. We have no idea how many additional trips there's going to be on the network. So, basically, the County Council, in saying this is a sustainable location, have failed to address these key points. That it's more than 2 kilometres from Witham Town Centre. There are no on-site key services, and they failed to enumerate the actual increase of traffic. Furthermore, they failed to look at the cumulative impact of over 2,000 houses. This development would take it to nearer 2,500 houses. To varying extents are going to use the B1018, which is the main road from Braintree to Witham via Cressing. So those houses are being built right now at Cressing, Silver End, Rivenhall and Witham. The traffic levels are increasing all the time on the B1018. There's been no cumulative assessment of that. I would also raise, as in terms of design, in terms of access, how usual it is to run a road through the middle of sports pitches. Because that's what the proposal is. The road will actually run through the middle of those sports pitches with buses regularly going through there where children and adults are playing football. How often is that designed into a planning application? And the idea that it will be likely used for taxis and motorcycles because they rarely come in that area, again, complete lack of local knowledge. Those of us who know the area know that particularly at weekends, huge numbers of motorcycles come through the villages. They also run up John Ray Walk. It's on a well-known route. There's no reason why some of them might not use that as well. And of course, they could legally do so. I've already mentioned what I believe is the dangerous access of the bus gate onto Rickstones Road because of the brick wall. But also, I think, again, the County Council have completely underestimated the impact on residents in Rickstones End. That road is parked with cars every single day of the week. There's on-street parking there, and there's no restrictions. Buses now and lorries have to go round those vehicles. And by creating a sight line across private land, and I hear what Neil said about he thinks it's highway land, you're going to affect the ability of people to park near the bus gate, which currently they can do now. Turning to Rectory Lane, as members know, we've tried so hard to protect Rectory Lane over the years. I weep, I really do, at the officer's report where it says the impact will be medium to low. If you walk down Rectory Lane currently, apart from the first bit, so from Rickstones Road, apart from the first bit where you've got the Bluebell site being built out, you come to a beautiful ancient rural lane where on the right you've got the rectory and one or two other houses, and on the left you've got open fields. Those open fields would be built on. You just see, apart from where the sports pitches are, all the way around the bend of Rectory Lane houses. It would have a very significant impact on the visual amenity of Rectory Lane. And I have to say, I think this council, the county council and Bellway have not acted as they could have done to protect Rectory Lane, which is, I believe, the only lane in the district which has so many classifications of protection. It's a quiet lane, a protected lane, and part of the John Ray Walk. Rivenhall, of course, is a lower tier village, but nevertheless, and in the countryside, but nevertheless, there is a significant degree of coalescence with the part of Rivenhall we locally call Rickstones End. Now, it was very carefully said in the officer report that the development does not breach the green buffer. It doesn't breach the green buffer. But the reason for that is BDC moved the green buffer north to allow this land to be open to development. Why did they do that when we repeatedly asked at local level, bring the buffer up to Rectory Lane and protect that land in Rectory Lane? It sounds to me like a fait accompli. But furthermore, we're not even sure it's safe now because, as I think I said at the last meeting, the agent for the site owner at the local plan hearing stated that he didn't want the green buffer there at all because it could hinder future development. Moving on to trees and ecology, yet again, most of the trees on the site are described as moderate or low quality. We never appear to hear from developers about high quality trees. And it's very disappointing that officers describe the loss of the nice belt of trees at the busgate access as not unduly detrimental, quote. But we don't even know, actually, do we, the exact extent of loss of trees, as officers have said, because this is an outline plan. But we do know we're going to lose a lot of trees on the site, a lot of trees and hedges along Rickstones Road, and the further loss at Collingwood Road, albeit it may be a few trees. But this is not acceptable, and as Councillor Lager said, this comes on top of the mass loss of trees and hedges in the area to other development sites. Ecology is discussed, and once again we see reassuring words, but the reality is once developers get on site, what happens is entirely different. All the local development sites have, to varying degrees, combinations of floodlit show homes, up-down lights on each of the houses, not best practice street lights and unbaffled bollard lights, which are all a terrific risk to losing the bats in the areas, and I don't think I've got any faith that this site would be any different. Given that this application is all matters reserved, given the uncertainties on the bus gate and the cycle path, and considering the large loss of hedges and trees, any claim of biodiversity net gain is highly questionable. I'm coming to my conclusion, Madam Chairman, I'm sure you'll be glad to hear. The local plan situation is, of course, key. The local plan is now very close to adoption, and it carries more weight having been through modification process. At page 73, the report says BDC is doing well on supply. I mentioned this at full council last night. 125% against target, and we have the 5.1-year housing supply, which has survived despite numerous appeal decisions recently. Officers state on page 74 that this site is in the countryside and significant weight, that's their words, significant weight can be given to the conflict with the current local plan, and of course as the site's not included in the new local plan, also it's in conflict with that. At page 106, the officer report says that this application respects the green buffer. But as I've already said, that is because the green buffer was moved back to allow this gap to exist. It is, quite frankly, incredible that this council or any council maintains that coalescence is avoided when the local people who live there clearly view this development as major coalescence with Witham. And it does appear that Rivenhall is being treated differently when other villages have been robustly defended by this council against coalescence. Whatever is said in the officer report, it is a fact on the ground that if this is granted tonight, then taken together with the Bluebells Phase 3, the number of houses in Rivenhall will more than double. Now, I'm not aware of any other village which is seeing that extent of development from such large developments within its boundaries. There are no Section 106 monies going to Rivenhall. I mean, I don't know how many meetings I've mentioned this. How can you possibly, time after time, grant industrial estates, housing developments, schools, as have been done in Rivenhall Parish, and not one penny goes towards projects that are allocated in the Open Spaces Action Plan, which the Parish Council diligently completes every year, including, by the way, the John Ray Walk. Now, no one's going to tell me that the John Ray Walk will not be used by people who live in this development. It runs next to the edge. Of course they will. So why did officers not put some money towards the Rivenhall Parish Council's request for improvements to the John Ray Walk? Absolutely remarkable. Rivenhall doesn't get any Section 106 money, but we do know, of course, where the money for the community building is going. Yet again, 4 kilometres away to the Maltings Lane development. Witham North does not have a community building following the demolition of the former BDC-owned building on Forest Road. And every single opportunity, and there are many of them over the years, to provide a community building in Witham North has been avoided. I find it incredible that the money, £100,000, is going to Maltings Lane again instead of into the local area. Every single opportunity has been missed, including the Little Elms redevelopment, Phase 1-2 Bellway and the Conrad Road. So in conclusion, Madam Chairman, I believe that we have more than enough grounds to refuse this application tonight, and I would like to move refusal, starting with the following: that this application is contrary to Section 38(6) of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004 for the reasons in it, contrary to paragraph 47 of the National Planning Policy Framework and paragraphs 59 of the National Planning Policy Framework, and in that respect the Council can demonstrate a housing land supply of 5.1 years against its housing need. The Council is currently meeting this objective. Furthermore, this site is in the rural parish of Rivenhall and would introduce up to 230 dwellings on an unallocated site in the countryside, significantly reducing the strategic gap between Rivenhall and Witham. I would then, without going into all the details, refer to all the other reasons which I referred to in, was it paragraph 1.4, where officers set out the harms that they themselves identify, which would then further flesh out the reasons for refusal. I so move, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Does it find a seconder before I move on? Councillor Wrench, I know you wish to speak. I just want to clarify something with Councillor Abbott first. Councillor Abbott, you made comment that there was nothing in the report from the Ramblers Association. There is. I know Neil didn't mention it. He couldn't mention everything. You'll find it on page 71.
My apologies. I probably meant to say the officer didn't mention it. My apologies.
Well, he couldn't mention absolutely everything this evening. Otherwise, we'd have been here till tomorrow, I think.
Point taken.
Yes. Councillor Wrench, you have a second. I'll let you speak now.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, certainly a strong speech to follow on from. So I won't go over too many of the points that Councillor Abbott has already covered in a lot of detail. However, before I do, I'd just like to point out there are some strengths to the development. Some of the facilities through to Section 106 are positive to see. The open space, the sports pitches, despite some of their design flaws, it is positive to see those being put forward, and also the play equipment.
And I think at long last it's very positive to see the EV charging points. It's something that I would like to see in many more developments across the district moving forward as well. Knowing the area relatively well, I've played golf many a times, not very well I must add, but hope that maybe they'll find a few of the golf balls if they do later on develop the site out. However, I would say some of the photos that were shown tonight, I don't think that's been picked up on. They were absolutely beautiful of the local surroundings. And the last time I did play golf there, I have to say I was quite taken aback and quite surprised with how that landscape has changed over the years with even the first couple of phases that have come through. It's certainly changed the outlook around that part of Witham and into Rivenhall. I do agree with Councillor Abbott regarding sustainability. I do question that. The fact that it's an unallocated site. And I've raised this before. We do have a 5-year land supply. It's taken a long time to get to that position, and it's something that I hear the terms quite frequently in this room about it being marginal. As far as I see it, it's pretty black and white. We have one, and we should defend that position, particularly that we do have a local plan in place as well, which adds weight to that. The cycleway is something that I'd mainly like to speak on, and I do feel that I just ask officers the question that is that really the most suitable location and route to take. I found the route quite confusing, and that was just looking at it, let alone riding a bike along it myself. At one point it was suggested that we could use the cycle route if we were unconfident, but later on that we would have to join main carriageway. I just found that if you're a child, for example, riding along there, and then you're having to dismount as you approach a road, some children may not, and looking at some of the junctions that they would have to tackle, I just don't feel is safe, considering that also, to add to that, some of the routes are shared with pedestrians as well. I feel that there's a safety issue there waiting, and a danger waiting to happen. I do want to just go back to the applicants, and I do welcome their work with local residents and stakeholders, but unfortunately I think it's been quite clear tonight that most of the residents, or particularly the ones we've seen today, still have many issues that remain unresolved, and that's why I will go against this application tonight. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mrs Spray, and then I come to Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I want to talk on 3 points. The 5-year supply, which I'll just touch on, the reasons why the balance, is in planning terms is in favour of approval in the report, and then the cycleway, which is the reason we're here tonight, because it was deferred from last time. Now, that's not to say that there aren't many other points, as outlined by Councillor Abbott in this report, but those are the points that I personally am going to concentrate on. With regards to the 5-year land supply, yes, as Councillor Abbott said, he did ask me a question about this at Council last night. We do have a 5-year supply, but it's 5.1 years, which I think, I'm right in saying, equates to about 66 homes above the base number. So it's precarious. I've noted comments which have been made before and have been made in the objections for this application, which say, well, you've either got a supply or you haven't. Yes, that's true as a statement, but how safe that is at an appeal, for example, is dependent on probably several things, not least which inspector you get, because we've had 3 different numbers quoted by 3 inspectors over the last few months. The first 2 said we didn't have a 5-year supply, and the third and most recent one said we did. It depends, I think, on what else is with an application. So Section 106 money, benefits to the locality and so on. So 5.1 years is pretty wafer thin. There was another comment which I think came through from Rejector today, which is, you've got a 5-year supply, that's it, and actually having a larger 5-year supply is not desirable. That was the comment made. Well, actually, having larger than 5.1 is very desirable, because we'd be on a lot safer ground. So that's a 5-year supply. The reasons why I think on balance officers' recommendation is for approval. in very straightforward terms, the advantages of the development outweigh the harms in planning terms. So I know obviously the site was not included in the local plan call for sites when that was made, but as we know, that does not stop a landowner or developer bringing forward an application. We do have a fairly well advanced local plan. It's not done and dusted. We haven't heard back from the inspectors yet, but it's quite a long way there, so it can be given considerable weight. But it's still, even when and if that is approved, it still doesn't stop, and we can't stop anyone coming forward with an application, even if it's not included in an approved local plan. That gives us more comfort, but applications still have to be considered on their merits. The list of Section 106 monies coming in with this application is, it is impressive, I think, and, do need to be given serious consideration. So you have affordable housing, 69 homes, land for allotments, contribution towards the new community building at Maltings Lane, and I know there are issues about that. Education provision, health contribution towards Whittam Health Centre, public transport contribution of £2.1 million. That's significant, really significant, towards increased and new bus services. £200,000 to the River Walk, a contribution to that. Sports pitches to be provided. Libraries contribution. More public open space. RAMS contribution. That's to the Blackwater Estuary Special Protection Area and the Essex Estuaries Special Area of Conservation. And then Skylarks, 2 plots nearby and 10 years of maintenance. I mean, it is an impressive list of 106 monies. I'll come on to the cycleway now. And I'm going to quote a bit from the officer's report, and I will say which pages and where I'm quoting from in case members want to follow. And I just would add at this stage, I'm so glad we've got paragraph numbers now, because it has made life an awful lot easier when I'm picking out what I want to say. I'll start with comments on the consultation, because there have been comments that it's been inadequate and the application has been rushed through. Well, I don't agree with that. The application was first submitted in 2020, so there has been a good deal of time for comment and discussion. And since we deferred this application in October last year, there have been a number of meetings with town councillors. There was an on-site meeting in Whittam with town council members in November to discuss possible alternative routes. There was a meeting with the Essex County Councillor in February, and several meetings with Essex Highways and BDC officers. And on page 69.94, a list of site notices and notifications that were sent out by BDC officers. Public notice published in the Braintree and Whittam Times, and the council wrote to all residents originally notified about the application, members of the public who'd previously submitted representations on the application, and additional properties along Collingwood Road, and all publicity included an additional reference to the proposed cycle improvements along Collingwood Road. So I actually feel that a real effort has been made to engage with interested parties. On page 61.715.2, there is a general comment I'm going to make in a report from Highways. Let me just find it. So, the National Planning Policy Framework, updated in July 2021, places significant emphasis on the need to reduce travel, particularly by private motor car, and promote the use of more sustainable modes of transport, such as public transport, cycling and walking. Well, I don't think any of us would disagree with that. And then in the third paragraph on that same point, due to the proposed site's location and significant improvements to public transport, cycling and walking mentioned below, this should minimise the number of additional trips, such as they would be unlikely to have a severe impact, as is the test set by the NPPF. On this basis, from a highway and transportation perspective, the impact of the proposal is acceptable to the Highway Authority. Now, you know, you may or may not agree with that statement, but county highways are the lead authority that BDC looks to for advice on these matters, and we do have to take note of what they say. Turning to cycleways in particular, bottom of page 78 and the top of page 79 talks about the route. So the bottom of page 78 sets out, well, I'm not going to read that, but it sets out the route to be taken. Top of page 79, the entrance and exits to and from the segregated cycle lanes have been designed in accordance with national guidance to ensure that they have been designed to be as safe as possible. Now, personally, Chairman, I don't believe that either BDC officers or highways officers would recommend a cycle route if it were deemed to be unsafe, let alone dangerous. I just don't think it's right to infer that they would. It goes on, points 11, 1, 15 and 16 talks about, 11, 1, 15 talks about trees, which we know are not being removed to facilitate the scheme. It will be necessary to remove the on-street parking bays, which the next point 116, goes on to talk about. And I know this has caused a lot of objections, and it is difficult. I mean, I'm honestly not being dismissive of this point. They are not residential parking bays. They are time limited bays. I appreciate that they are used regularly by residents for a number of reasons, or not just residents, but people coming into Witham, and that they will be lost. But officers, point 11, 118, officers take the view that the benefits of delivering high quality segregated cycle lanes outweigh the harm arising from the loss of the time limited parking bays. And I'm sure I'll get criticised for saying this, but when I visit towns, and whether it's a town I know or a town I'm visiting for the first time, obviously if I can find on street free parking, that's great. If I can't, I just assume that I'm going to have to go into a car park and pay, because that's the way it is. You have to pay for parking in not all car parks. Some you don't for the first hour or so, but some you do, and it's the way it is. And as far as officers are concerned, the loss of those spaces is outweighed by the benefits of providing the cycle lanes. I will turn then to pages 80, point 11.120, which is national guidance on cycleways. And the national guidance says that shared cycleway paths do not provide the best facility for cyclists, which is why segregated cycle lanes are proposed along Collingwood Road, where the land is available within the highway to provide them. Now, there are places where there is insufficient highway land and where it's got to be a shared pedestrian cycleway to be provided, where this can be done safely. And again, I would say that I would strongly suggest that highways officers and planning officers would not suggest this if it could not be provided safely. And the end of that point says the shared pedestrian cycleway was deemed to be the best way to provide improved facilities for pedestrians and cyclists passing through this area. For a variety of reasons, alternative schemes have been deemed to be unsuitable or unsafe. And again, still on page 80, points 11.123 and 11.124 talk about the meetings that have been held between highways officers, BDC officers, and the town council, some members of the town council, to look at alternative schemes which were put forward. But for one reason or another, those alternative schemes have not been found to be suitable. I've nearly finished on this, Chairman, you'll be pleased to hear. Page 81, point 11.127, talks about the stepped cycle lanes proposed along Collingwood Road. They would be the first of their kind in the district, and quote from the report would be of a format which is held to be best practice within Local Transport Note 1/20, Cycle Infrastructure Design 2020. The arrangement would give priority to cycles as a mode of transport in their own right and would promote the provision of a coherent, connected, segregated and safe cycle route in accordance with the Council's Cycling Strategy 2021. And then it goes on to talk about the TROs, which we've already discussed, and which we know if they are not successful, then the developer would be obliged to deliver a suitable alternative scheme delivering connectivity for pedestrians and cycles along this route, but we have already discussed that. And finally, on this bit, on page 83, point 11.131, in summary, officers consider the development's proposed location is or can be made sustainable, and therefore it would not be justified to refuse the proposal on the basis that there is insufficient access to a genuine choice of transport modes in this location. In addition, the development proposes to deliver substantial improvements to the wider foot and cycle path network, which those living nearby to the site can take advantage of, as well as the residents of the development itself. Officers are of the view this amounts to significant additional benefits in the planning balance over and above that strictly required to comply with policy. And down at the bottom, 11.2.3, the Highway Authority has stated they do not consider the residual cumulative impacts of this development upon the road network caused by this development would be severe. Therefore, the NPPF would direct against refusing this application on highways grounds. This area of Witham has a potential to provide excellent access to alternative means of sustainable transport, but finds itself with a road network that is at times operating beyond capacity improvement, particularly during the morning and evening peak hours. And down at the bottom, the Highway Authority has experience of a number of sites with similar constraints elsewhere in Essex and has observed that a generous package of improvements to existing sustainable transport networks can be very effective at reducing trip rates from new development, and that improved sustainable transport networks can also help facilitate a modal shift for some existing residents who will also be able to access improved bus services as well as pedestrian and cycle facilities. Very lastly, Chairman, Councillor Ritchie, who I'm sorry he's unable to be here tonight, but he and I made a site visit in early January to Chelmsford to look at the cycleway that runs along the bottom end of Broomfield Road. And this was at the invitation of Essex County Highways officers. I moved deferral of this application in October and Councillor Ritchie seconded. So they asked us if we'd like to go and have a look at this cycle route. We were there, I guess, for about 30 to 45 minutes, early morning. There was lots of traffic around. Anybody who knows that road, and I know it well, it is extremely busy. Lots of cars, buses, vans. The officer explained the setup and the operation of the cycleway to us. We walked up and down and we stood there for a while. Interestingly, there were a number of cyclists using that route, and the majority of them actually were of, I would say, the older age group, by which I mean they weren't in their 30s or their 40s or possibly even their 50s from what I can see. And they, all of them, looked extremely comfortable about using that cycle route, which has many similarities to the one being suggested here. Nobody looked particularly fraught. Nobody seemed to be finding it difficult. It was a very useful visit to see it in action. So overall, Chairman, I'm pretty content with this report. I know that Councillor Abbott has refused us. Obviously, we need to deal with that. But for the reasons that I have mentioned, I'm happy with this, and I think that officers, both county and BDC officers, and the applicant, and all those who've taken part in the consultation, local people as well, are to be congratulated on the effort that they have put in over time in bringing this forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. I mean, you've read most of the report to us, but the thing that I'm still concerned about is that we're talking about this site being sustainable. If this bus route does not go ahead because of the bats, then it does not become sustainable, which is still becomes a concern. If the cabinet member at county doesn't approve the TRO, are we in any way going to make sure that all these things are set in place before the houses are built, or are we going to put the cart before the horse, or the horse before the cart? Is my head spinning on these matters.
I take those points on board. I mean, it is an outline application.
Yes, I know it is, yes. And Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not often I disagree with Councillor Spray. It's not often that I sort of go against recommendations made by our professional officers in good faith. I was underwhelmed by this application last time we considered it, and there's no fresh evidence that I can see for me to see it in a more favourable light. There's an enormous amount of detail provided for an outline application, which this is, but to my mind, we don't really need to go any further than the introduction. This is a proposal outside settlement boundary. It's not in our local plan. It's not in our local emerging plan. It's on a site that's been rejected by local plan panel as recently as 2016 and on a number of times before that. It's not an invited application. It's purely speculative, and the fact that it is branded as Phase 4, I think it's a misnomer. The fact that there's Phase 1, 2, and 3 doesn't naturally follow to a Phase 4. It is a different application on a different site, and I don't think I can, in all conscience, Chair, support it.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, listened very carefully to what my fellow committee members have been saying, and also thank you very much for that really detailed report on what's quite a complicated application, even though it's an outline application. I sort of I'm slightly wrestling with this as well. The strongest argument, I completely agree with Councillor Mann, the strongest argument I think against this application is the fact it's not in the development plan. It's contrary to development plan, contrary to Section 2, which in the officer's report I agree is both to be given significant weight. But there, I'm afraid, I feel that the harms start to diminish. I completely appreciate the concerns about coalescence with Rivenhall, but I agree with the officer's conclusion, really, that the Rivenhall end is, I'm afraid, sort of effectively already slightly joined up with Whittam now because of the development on Rickstone Road, and of course we have the location of the green buffer in Section 2, which I think an inspector would say, well, this is where your green buffer is drawn. Did you not include this site in your green buffer? So I think that argument is unfortunately weak. Obviously, there's the heritage aspect of the rectory, but our heritage advisor puts the harm at the lesser end of substantial, at the lower end of less than substantial. Sorry, and I think really those are, for me, the three major harms. But against that, I have to weigh what I think will be quite a high quality development. I know it's called Phase 4, but it will flow on from what is already there. And actually, I mean, ideally one would have had a master plan for the whole site if the whole site had been allocated. But I think it's possible for these to be integrated. I like the fact that there is this vision statement and the design code, which is going to be incorporated as one of the conditions. That the housing mix, it's one of the conditions, although this is normally reserved matters. The high sustainability in terms of building regs, that's going to be as part of the design code. So there are a lot of benefits. Well, there's quite a high quality. I think it probably will become quite a high quality development. And on top of that, we have the sustainable transport package, and it is, and I note what Councillor Scattergood says about the tree, which I think is a significant issue, but this is bringing forward a proposal which would enable a modal shift, which if we want to, this is something that we are all in favour of, and if we want to address congestion in towns like Witham, we've got to try somehow or other to get people out of their cars for the shorter journeys, and this will, the package that has been put forward will help to achieve that. I know there are concerns about, there's some compromises that have had to be made in terms of the proposed cycle route, in particular down Collingwood Road. Councillor Abbott's made some good points about particularly the slide we have on the screen and so on. The stepped cycle lane, I've seen one in Cambridge in Hills Road. It actually works quite well, although I was a bit alarmed about the thought of it as a car driver. So I think that will work. There is obviously the issue of the parked cars, but that I think is the only real major issue on that section of Collingwood Road, but there is alternative parking available. So I feel, then of course we have the substantial package of Section 106 measures, which Councillor Spray has referred to. The only thing that's really troubling me is the community centre, actually. And I think there's a very fair point that it's the community centre will be Maltings Lane is a long way from this development, and people who are going to be living who would live in this whole area. So I just wonder, would it be permissible to have that wording of that just to refer to Witham, the community building in Witham, or does it have to be referred to a specific project? Thank you.
Would you like to come back?
If it's okay, Madam
You've
Chairman,
been
could I?
very quiet all evening. I'll let you go.
Well, no, I might just pass the specific question over to Neil on Maltings Lane, but afterwards, if possible. Yeah, thank you. Neil, are you able to come back on that?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Parker. So the question about the community building contribution, we have had agreements where we'd specified that money could be used for improvement of community facilities within a geographic area. So we could refer to improvements in Witham. I think the point that we were trying to make in the committee report was that there isn't a scheme which we can identify within North Witham, and I think, having met some of the reps, I think that was. It was felt that officers were sort of criticising the town council, because we did ask the town council if they could identify a project, because it's something we've been criticised as officers before for not consulting them on how 106 money is spent. So we did ask about whether a project could be identified in North Witham to spend the money on, and they couldn't, and nor could officers. So, I mean, that's it's questionable whether that should be the position, that there isn't a project in North Witham that we can identify, but the fact remains is that there isn't. So whilst we could specify that the money could be spent on a project within Witham, we'd need to be, well, I think my concern would be, where would we spend it if not Maltings Lane, in terms of there being an identified project, and we've only got a sort of limited amount of time to actually spend the money. We don't want to be in a position where we take a contribution then find that we can't spend it. So I think we could, I think, change the wording of the agreement to reflect that, but I'm not sure how helpful it would be in terms of providing a facility somewhere else in Witham other than at Maltings Lane. I don't know if that answers the question, or hopefully that's some help.
Well, I think it would still allow, if one had a wording just referring to Witham, it would still allow it to be used in Maltings Lane. But I suppose what I'm saying is that if a project did come forward somehow or other within an acceptable timescale, that could also be used for that. It would just give us that. I would feel it would give us that flexibility if it's acceptable in terms of sort of legal terms.
Thank you. Chris, you wish it, and then I've got Councillor Mrs. Beavers wishes to speak, so I'll let you go first.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just in the context of the reasons for refusal suggested by Councillor Abbott and seconded by Councillor Wrench, I just wanted to come back on 2 points, if I may. Obviously, my role this evening is just to provide advice. It's members' decision clearly this evening in terms of the application. Unsurprisingly, the first point was just around 5-year housing land supply, and I just want to clarify that position so there's no ambiguity on this. So, as members will be aware, we look at the housing land supply position each year as of 31st of March. So we started last year on the 31st of March 2021 with what we argued was a supply of 5.34 years. That was reduced down to 5.27, and up until the last appeal that we have fought and being considered a public inquiry, we have not had the backing of a planning inspector who has concurred that we do actually have a 5-year housing land supply. So we've had a number of high-profile appeals. We had 2 public inquiries at the end of last year. The High Garrett public inquiry, the inspector concluded that we didn't have a 5-year housing land supply. With the Black Notley, which came afterwards, the inspector did conclude we had a 5-year, but this is where we have now got down, it's been reduced down to 5.1 years. And I think it's important in the context of that decision that in coming to that determination, the inspector did not consider all of the sites included within the supply. She included or considered the sites that were in dispute, which notably included the second largest strategic site within the emerging draft local plan, as in Straits Mill. So Straits Mill, for everybody's benefit, is land east of Broad Road in Braintree. It's for up to 1,000 homes, and the inspector stripped out that particular site from the supply on the basis of the lack of deliverable evidence that that site would come forward within 5 years, and that's a site with outline planning permission that has been granted subject to a 106 agreement that has been issued. So in the context of that appeal decision, I think that highlights that although we were able to establish we have a 5-year supply, as we've repeatedly said, the position is incredibly marginal, and we're now at a stage where the buffer, effectively, in terms of the surplus additional houses, we're now down to, I think it's 66, I think Councillor Spray referenced that, I think that's the correct figure. So we've had hundreds of houses stripped out from the supply. Now, just to pick up on the comment that this is a matter that is black or white or clear cut, it absolutely, from officer perspective, is not the case. This will continue to be an issue that will dominate planning decisions in years to come. And now that we've been able to demonstrate finally that we do have a 5-year supply, the most important thing is that we are able to continue to maintain it. So in terms of next steps, we have the appeal decision in December, which established a 5.1 year supply. On adoption of Section 2 of the local plan, we will get a boost in terms of our supply positions. We need to be clear on that, because we'll be able to count the sites allocated within the draft 2, the Section 2 plan, that don't have the benefit of planning permission. But then in the summer, we will be doing the roll forward exercise and looking at the housing land supply position as of the 31st of March this year. And as part of that exercise, the policy team will need to analyse all of the sites that have been granted planning permission. They will need to look at the evidence that's supplied by the developers for each of those sites, and we will then need to establish that position. But going forward, we will continue to face challenges from developers. We've got pending appeals that will still come forward, and this will be a matter of considerable debate and argument at public inquiry, most likely for sites of this size. And the attack that will come will always be on the delivery, and it will be on, sites of this size and larger, but particularly our strategic sites, that these are not sites that will come forward and deliver housing within the 5-year. And that's the position that so far we haven't had the support from inspectors on. So I say that with huge caution, because it isn't just a case of being able to demonstrate it. We need to be able to maintain it. And this is a site that, if members were minded to grant planning permission, we have a 106 agreement that would be ready to be completed. The decision could be issued before that key date of 31st of March. And this is a site that could go into that supply when we do the roll forward later into the summer, and strengthen our position. Because I think the last thing, from an officer perspective, that we want to see is, with a newly adopted local plan, that we end up in a position where we lose the 5-year housing land supply because we haven't got a sufficient buffer effectively. The last thing I'll say on the supply point, just by way of context, is members will recall an appeal decision in relation to phase 1 of the Brook Green scheme that was allowed at appeals. This is a site on the edge of Braintree, and that appeal inspector allowed that scheme on the basis of us having a 5-year supply. So it doesn't mean that because you have a 5-year supply, inspectors will automatically consider that weighs against the proposal. There isn't a ceiling that's defined within the MPPF. We've seen appeal decisions elsewhere across the country where authorities have got 5, 6, 7 years supply and are still allowed appeals. So I just wanted to make it clear that this is not as clear-cut as potentially it's been suggested. Certainly from an officer's perspective, it isn't, based on the work that's gone into defending this position over a number of years. The second point, just to come back on, is just on the sustainability points. And I would refer back to the Black Notley appeal decision that was received in December. So in terms of this point about location, access to services and facilities, I completely accept the points that have been made, and the factual point that this is a site that's located within the parish of Rivenhall. But from certainly my view as a professional planning officer, I would argue that an appeal inspector would view this site as being located adjacent to the town of Witham, which is one of the higher order settlements in both the adopted and emerging plan. And I do not believe that we would find support as an authority in considering that the location is unsustainable in relation to its access to service and facilities. So I would suggest there's some caution around that. And just by way of contrast in relation to the Black Notley appeal on that specific point, the inspector in relation to that appeal concluded that Black Notley was sustainable for the scale of development that's proposed, given its access to day-to-day services and facilities, and that was still a considerable application of 90 dwellings. So from an officer perspective, I really struggle with the idea that we would receive support from the inspector in relation to this application, that the site could be, we would successfully defend an appeal on that point. As a reason for refusal, it is arguable, but I just need to underline the likelihood of appeal success is very high, I think, if members decided to refuse the application this evening. Thank you, Madam Chairman, for coming back on those 2 points, and happy to clarify the supply point any further.
Thank you, Chris. I just want to come back to you on some things you just said, but can I get someone to move standing orders so we don't get an interruption between things, that we could extend this meeting? All those in favour of extending till we get this completed. Thank you. You said that inspectors are not considering our housing thing because they do not think a site is deliverable. Would an inspector then not look at this and say, the TRO hasn't been decided, this hasn't been decided, that they could consider this is undeliverable?
So it's a perfectly valid question, Madam Chairman. I think in response to that, and based on what we've seen on other sites, obviously the scale of the development in this particular case, it's a lower number. The applicant is a house builder with a proven record of delivery within the district, and they are effectively building out adjacent phases on adjacent land. So I think it would be highly probable that an inspector would find it a compelling argument to say that we would be able to expect delivery from this site within a 5-year period, and that would certainly be our position as planning officers in terms of putting that forward as part of a roll forward. Obviously, you need to go through the evidence basis and firm that up, but Straits Mill, one of the criticisms around that was that there wasn't an end developer in place for that site, and obviously it's a larger strategic site for, as I said, up to 1,000 homes. So we wouldn't be able to count all of those thousands, but even the proportion that we included within the supply was not deemed to be deliverable within that period, taking lead-in times for reserved matters, delivering the infrastructure and so forth. But in this particular case, there's a lot that weighs in favour of delivery, given the scale, given the applicant is a house builder, and given the fact that they're building out on adjacent land. So effectively, if this was granted planning permission, it would logically, they would move then onto this site coming through.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs. Beavis.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I thought that was really helpful from Chris Padgey as well. I mean, I find myself agreeing with Councillor Abbott, Councillor Mann and Councillor Wrench, so therefore I'm not going to sort of go over the points they've already made. But, I mean, we've seen applications similar to this all around the district over many years, and, you know, quite simply, it's overdevelopment in a small rural village with no links. And in fact, we had a housing development proposed of 73 in Sybil Headingham a few weeks ago now, turned down by the inspector for those very reasons, that it just wasn't linked even to the, you know, the village of Sybil Headingham. It seems to me also that, you know, if we do approve this evening, it's just piecemeal. And that was the whole idea originally of a local plan, so that we took a holistic view of our district. Councillor Spray quite eloquently read through all of the Section 106 agreements, and, you know, it sounds really tempting because, you know, there's a huge amount offered on the table, but it's, you know, it's completely unsustainable. And we heard in the chamber last evening from our leader, Councillor Butland, saying that, you know, there's the levelling up opportunity coming down, and, you know, he would favour an Essex deal. And surely we don't have to keep relying on houses to deliver all of the infrastructure that we require around our district, because no doubt some of the stuff coming from this, the people of Witham and the Town Council would actually like. And the parish council too, but not just through delivering all of these homes. The other point I wanted to make, and I made it in this chamber last evening, was about, you know, the congestion of this district. And Councillor Parker spoke about, you know, a modal shift, and, you know, of course we'd all like to see, you know, more of that, but we're not just talking about a modal shift in one part of our district. And I spoke last evening about a chap in Sybil Headingham who's just got a job in Witham, and yet sometimes it can take him 2 hours to get into Witham and 2 hours to get home again. And these people that would, you know, live on this new estate, you know, they are going to have relatives around the rest of the district. We're a very connected district, and these homes just add to the, you know, the overall congestion of our district. And finally, we also heard from Councillor Spray this evening and Councillor Parker about a cycle lane in Witham and one in Hills Road in Cambridge. I was actually in Hills Road in Cambridge myself on Friday afternoon, and actually it was a little bit quieter because we had all the bad weather. But, you know, one can't compare a dangerous small rural road in Witham with Hills Road in Cambridge and the road that Councillor Spray mentions in Chelmsford. You can't compare and contrast them. It's just impossible to do that. So I find that sort of quite difficult statement to kind of understand. Anyway, in summary of all of that, Madam Chairman, I won't be supporting this evening, and I do find that eventually if this does come back, then it comes back through the original process that we had, you know, in a future call for sites. I just think it's too premature and it hasn't been thought through. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Beavers. Councillor Abbott, I will let you come back. It's getting late.
Thank you. Just very briefly, Madam Chairman. I don't know. I found what Mr. Paggi said, you know, sort of trying to put pressure, I felt a little bit, and saying, well, we're definitely going to lose this appeal, more or less, was not really the right way to be going about this. It's for members to decide. And I never said, he said he was discussing my reasons for refusal. I didn't mention unsustainable location. I never mentioned it. And actually what I was quoting from was the reasons for refusal from the Keldon application. So I was quoting officers' own words. I wasn't inventing something. In terms of Councillor Spray said about alternatives, if, as I strongly suspect, and a lot of other people do, this cycling proposal on Collingwood Road runs into trouble because of the TRO process, there will be masses of objections. And this, to me, remaining question about the carriageway width, there are no alternatives. They've already been explored with the Town Council and highways, and then none of them were accepted. Therefore, that will not be delivered. And that comes back to the point you were making, Madam Chairman. We have great uncertainties around what can actually be delivered in terms of all of these benefits. Another point I just omitted to make, Mr. Paggi himself just said, when Section 2 comes through and adopted, we're going to get a boost in our housing supply. Well, that's very close now. If this goes to appeal, when would it be heard? Not for many months. We could have a Section 2 in place by then. Also, of course, the 5-year housing supply is a moving feast. We'll be back here in a couple of weeks' time looking at other applications, and then after that, the whole 5-year housing supply does not hang on this one application, and it's ridiculous to suggest otherwise. Final point, I can't avoid this. Neil Jones said we couldn't find money to identify projects. Rivenhall has put identified projects into the Council's Open Spaces Action Plan, and they have been ignored time after time after time. Did officers even look in there to look at the schemes we've got, which money from this development could have gone against? I don't even believe they looked. I have to say that, because yet again we've been ignored. The Maltings Lane issue is one thing, but to actually repeatedly ignore the Parish Council's own representations in that plan is not acceptable. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
I think actually Neil said they approached Witham Town Council. I think that was his words, wasn't it, Neil? That you approached Witham Town Council.
Yeah, but the point is, Madam Chairman, it's the Open Spaces Action Plan.
I'm just trying to make sure that what Neil said was...
Yes, sorry, Madam Chair. It was in respect of the community building was the point I was making rather than the open space.
Thank you.
Sorry, I appreciate the time. Just a couple of points, just to come back on a couple of things just before members make a decision, because I think they're quite important. Just regards to Chris was talking about whether the site could be considered deliverable by an inspector, and the point was made about TROs and what happens if they fail. Just to make a point, within the 106 there are alternative schemes to each of the provisions, so that if something can't happen because the TRO fails, there is a fallback, because we didn't want to be in that position where the site wasn't deliverable, and obviously the applicant didn't want it either. So there are provisions. So in respect of the bus gate, which was one point that you made, Madam Chair, if the bus gate couldn't be provided, then that would obviously prevent the bus gate and that loop being provided, but it wouldn't necessarily preclude a bus service coming into the development. It would need a turning facility. It would be less attractive, but there is money there. So a bus service still could be provided, or a service strengthened along Forest Road. So just on that point. Just two other points, just very quickly. On the cycling, Councillor Spray mentioned about the cycle lane, the entrance and the exits, and quoted the report. Just to clarify, because I wouldn't want that to be misconstrued. Members will have seen the update report that we sent around with regards to Councillor Playall's comments and the comments that he received from Sustrans and Cycling UK. One of the points that they raised was that they were critical of the way that the exits from those cycle lanes had been designed. did speak to the Highway Authority officers and also the designer about that. If the scheme comes forward, if it gets a TRO, so ifs and ifs, it would be subject to a stage 2 safety audit at detailed design stage, and further revisions could be looked at. If there's a better way of doing it, that could be looked at. So just to pick up on that point, so Councillor Spray wasn't speaking out of turn, she was simply repeating the report, but just to clarify. And with regards to the alternatives to the Collingwood Road scheme, just to make clear, my advice as an officer and the Highway Authority position is we're not saying there is no other scheme to Collingwood Road in Witham. We're saying we think, having looked at the alternatives, we think Collingwood Road is the best scheme of the ones that are available. The other ones have benefits but also have constraints which outweigh it. So we're saying Collingwood Road is better. But if Collingwood Road wasn't to be provided as a scheme for some reason and there was a financial contribution secured in lieu of that, that money could be spent on another scheme within Witham, if that's what we were looking at. So it's not to say we've looked at the rest of Witham and there are no other cycle schemes, which is, I think, what was being suggested. We're just saying that the other schemes we've looked at aren't as good, in our view, as a Collingwood Road scheme. So hopefully that helps. And just to clarify a few points, thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. Well, members, I think we've given this a very good hearing, and I thank you all for your patience and staying awake. We have a motion on the table for refusal. This was proposed by Councillor Abbott and seconded by Councillor Wrench. I'm going to put that to the vote first. All those in favour of refusal? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's 6 for refusal. Those against refusal is always 1, 2, 3, 4. Abstentions? That has gone. The refusal has been granted. Thank you, members. Councillor Abbott, you've got your sheet of.
Yeah, and happy to liaise with officers about the details. But yeah, I referred to all of the reasons.
You have mentioned them.
But unsustainable location wasn't one of them.
Thank you. Well, thank you, members. Thank you very much indeed. And I don't know about you, I'm quite tired. We did make the 10:15, so thank you very much indeed, and thank you to officers. Thank you for Carol for sitting through this lengthy process, and thank you very much, Martin, for coming this evening. We do appreciate seeing you when we have highway issues.